Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna De Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here, author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast grim dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, the commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the office. Welcome to Table Talk. It is so good to have you tonight. Tonight, I'm going to be speaking with Maxwell Alexander Drake, who I'm very excited to be able to speak with individually tonight. I first got to know him when I saw him give a presentation at the Gen Con Writers Symposium about the story creation. And once I heard him speak, I went right over to his booth and I bought his book, Dynamic Story Creation, which is one of the very first books that I found valuable, actually, in learning how to write stories. And I reference it often. I know I've talked about it on the streams before. So everyone, please welcome him right now, Maxwell Alexander Drake. He goes by Drake. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming in. I've been meaning to speak with, or wanting to speak with you for several months again. We've spoken before as part of panel discussions online, but I think this is our first time to actually have a one-on-one discussion. And so It is so good to have you here. Drake, do you want to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are? Because you've got a lot going on. And what's going on right now? Because you've got a lot going on too, and how people can find you. And what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a writer. I've got a long resume. I mean, I've done everything from award-winning novelist, award-winning scriptwriter. I've worked for, as the lead fiction writer for a massive game from Sony. I've written for other tabletop games. I've done comics and stage plays and musicals. And I teach all over the world. I'm a writer. I do stuff. Like, that's really it. I mean, everything. Starting Writer Studio is a brand new site. I'm kind of, for those that don't know,
right here.
I actually have had some serious health issues that have kind of taken me out of the game for quite a few years. The last was cancer. So the last time we actually talked, when I was on your show, I think I had only been out of cancer treatment for a month. So I honestly don't remember much about. I remember being on the show, but I don't remember what we talked about. I don't remember much about it at all. Chemotherapy is rough. So, this last year and a half, it's been a lot of just getting back into things, getting healed up, getting focused again. So Star Writer Studio, this is a new site. It's still in the process of being created, so there's not a ton of stuff that's on it yet. Like the store is still a little bereft of everything that I do and everything like that. So working on getting it out. But the big thing is that we talked about earlier. I did launch a online writing platform for writers. So basically, think about it like an Uber writers group that you get to be in. You get to work with me. You get to work with all the other members. You get to be in an environment that is basically, I'm a dictator in there. I'm a benevolent dictator. But if you've ever been to a writers group, which I've been to many over the last 30 years, there's always something wrong with them. Either they have some stupid rule that's, just anti-learning, or they have some toxic person or whatever. So the writing room is designed to be a place for serious people who want to get serious about their writing and improve their writing.
This is the writer's room right here.
Yeah. So that's the sales page for it. I did not write that. It is way too stinking long. So for your members listening tonight, I gave you a link for 50% off membership through February. And if you don't want to read the entire sales copy, just scroll all the way to the bottom of that obnoxiously long page and just click the button, because there's a lot to it.
Oh, there is a lot on this page.
There's a lot. My marketing team is like, no, this is what I'm like, whatever. I'm not a marketer. So I let them do it. But so it's normally $97 a month, but you guys get it for 50% off. If you want to do it. And I do classes in it. I do critique groups every week. Plus there's other critique groups. There's writing sessions where we hold you accountable. But like, one of the main things about it is that I think everybody really appreciates. You actually have to take a certification course before you can join the critique groups, so that everybody knows exactly how to behave and exactly what is expected of you, both as a critiquer and a critiquee. And it's just stuff that I've learned over the last 30 years that makes a critique group be as advantageous to the members as it possibly can be. And I'm not the only one doing it. The other, we call ourselves sages. The other sage is a guy named Travis Cody, who was he worked in Hollywood for 20 years. He was one of the executives at Crane Studio. So he's worked on pretty much like all of the John Travolta movies and a whole bunch of different things like that. And everything I'm doing on the pro side, he's doing, he will be doing on the script side. Right now, we're only marketing to prose writers to kind of get it off the ground and launch it, because it's only a couple months old at this point. So we don't have a huge amount of members. But once we get it going, we'll open it up on the script side as well and start doing classes on script writing and everything else.
Oh, look, your link. We're actually in the link. If you're reading this letter, because if you use that link, if you're reading this letter, it's because the amazing minds behind the Table Talk show have deemed you worthy of literary greatness. Awesome. All right. So use that link. I also put that link in the Discord server. So I know we got a lot of people who are writing stuff and want this kind of critique. So that's very valuable. Thank you very much for offering the discount to everybody here.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you write fiction and fantasy. So is this the place to be for the fantasy catalog?
Yeah, I mean, that's the store that's on Star Writer Studio. So that I got everything set up in categories. So the Gems of Oblivion is a big fantasy saga. Realm of the Dying Sun is a big fantasy saga. Although that right now is put on hold. I've got a bunch of standalone stuff. My short story collections. Skies of Destiny is kind of a fantastical sci-fi story. That's a special case because so my podcast, we're now over 100 episodes, and me and my podcast partner last year were like, man, what else are we going to talk about? I mean, we have over 100 episodes. And so one of the things we decided to do was to plot a book live on the podcast. And it ended up being a book called Magic Fall, which is the first book of the Skies of Destiny series. And she's Finnish. She lives in Finland. And she flew over to the States last summer to go to Comic-Con with me, or this summer to go to Comic-Con with me. So we released the book there. It was really awesome. It's the first time we met in person. I've been doing a podcast with her for 3 years and never actually have I met her. But I mean, again, I live in Las Vegas. She lives in, Finland. It's not like it's an easy commute. So book 1 is out, and we've been plotting book 2 live in some of the, I mean, we're not doing it in every episode, obviously, but we're already in the writing stage on book 2. It'll also be out for Comic-Con, so out by July. And then it's going to be a 3-book series, which we've already kind of plotted out. So
that's the podcast, let me bring that up.
Releasing Your Inner Dragon.
That's right. Because I see it go by from time to time on YouTube because I'm subscribed, so I listen. Releasing Your Dragon?
Releasing Your Inner Dragon.
Your Inner Dragon. Trying to bring up the page.
It's on every podcast platform, including YouTube. And then just to finish up, the Sangwell Chronicles is actually Marie's series. I don't have it all up yet. Again, I've got a lot going on. So, yeah.
Well, a lot of us do on this. on this, by including myself. Releasing Your Inner Dragon. We're on YouTube. So I'm going to put the YouTube link here so that you can also subscribe to this because I'm subscribed too. So there we go. Yeah, 110 videos here.
Yeah.
Releasing Your Inner Dragon.
Yeah.
A lot of material.
And we haven't really even marketed it yet. I just, I was telling you earlier, I just met with my marketing team that I just brought on board. And the one thing we were talking about today was rebranding the podcast, the YouTube show, doing a whole bunch of different things and working on actually now getting subscribers for the first time. After creating content for 3 years, I guess it's time to start letting the world know that we're actually there. But again, cancer really threw a wrench in a lot of my plans over these last couple of years. It's an all-consuming situation. I mean, it does kill 1 in 3. It's a horrible disease.
But then also, I guess finally, one of the other things. So Drake U is where you need to go for your books on writing.
And then also I have writing series on, actual videos on there. Okay.
And so books and videos.
Yep.
And so this is where you can get dynamic story creation in plain English. The new book, which we'll talk about later on, which is The Ultimate Guide to Show, Don't Tell. I know some people here on the show have already bought that. And then also Better Writing, Point of View, What's the Point, or Better Writing Through Stronger Narrative, which I've also read. I haven't gotten this middle one yet.
I mean, it just dropped at Comic-Con, so it's brand new.
It's brand new. Okay. So that is okay. So I'm not that behind, but I'm a big fan of these books. It seems like we've encountered a couple of authors which have the very direct or favor this very direct approach to writing advice, and Drake is definitely one of them right here with that style that comes down here.
Well, there's a reason why I named it the brutal writing advice.
It is that. Let's see. So I guess the final thing is that, hey, if you want to connect, if you are new here and you want to connect with something that I'm doing, well, I'm got the Trial of St. Gabriel up here on Kickstarter right now, which is just a short story. Just a short story. I've been trying to do a Christmas story for years, and I said I'm finally going to get it out. So I have got the Trial of St. Gabriel, the dark short story, a dark story of the Christmas massacre. Deals with some heavy themes around Christmas that we don't often deal with, I think. And you can download a preview here, and then it's only $4 as well for the digital version. But I actually ordered the revised proof of the physical copy today, so that's what I'm doing.
That is awesome.
All right, so I'm going to take all that down. All right, let's talk about where to begin. Oh, actually, so you've been involved with a bunch of different projects, and I think that it would be interesting to talk about what it's like to be a part of some of these major franchises that a lot of us know here in the Geekverse. So you wrote for EverQuest Next.
I was the lead fiction writer.
Okay. Will you tell us what that is, what you did, and what that was like?
Yeah.
Everyone who would love to have a job like that.
Me too. It was really good while it lasted. It was 3 years. It was supposed to be 6 years. What I didn't know when I took the gig was that Sony was actually actively looking to sell off SOE, Sony Online Entertainment. They were invested in their, PlayStation line. That's where they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do PC games anymore. Of course, they didn't, mention any of that to us. And they did drop $650 million to produce EverQuest Next. And 3 years in, they sold it to Daybreak. They sold the whole kit and caboodle. And I think Daybreak ended up spending about $1 billion to buy it. And then we were like, oh, we still need $325 million to finish this game that isn't a game yet. And they were like, yeah, you know what? We're just going to not do that. So I wrote so much stuff for it that no one will ever see. Although I do have a membership section now on the Starving Rider Studio. It's called Cultus of Draco. And I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff in there that's exclusive to them. But one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of those Sony stories that they're not mine. I don't actually have the rights to them, so I can't do anything with them. So I'm going to just throw them up there in the membership section for people who want to read some of those things. Because I spent a lot of time writing a lot of stuff for them that is basically just never going to be read.
Well, I've heard that from actually a couple of other people who have worked with large companies like that, developing something. They have a lot of money. It's really cool. You bring a lot of people together. I don't know if that's in your, but in their case, it was. They create something great. And then, you know what? Somebody can just walk in and say, you know what? This is done. And just throw it in a drawer and you're closed down and you can walk. So I've had that story from a couple of people who've been like, man, I poured my heart into stuff and we just created something freaking fantastic. And we got paid.
Yeah.
But now
it was 3 years of a great paycheck.
That's what I've heard from other people as well. So what is that like? So what did you write? Were you writing the main storyline? So EverQuest Next is an RPG, right?
Yeah, it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So EverQuest was the first MMORPG. And then, EverQuest 2 came out. We're talking, 20 million players, somewhere around in there in its heyday. And so EverQuest Next was going to be the third version. I was actually the second person hired on the project. We ended up with about 120 people on the crew. And they came to me. The producers were fans of mine from like my Genesis saga or whatever. And they came up to me and they were like, hey, we've never had a real writer on staff. So, if you're interested, actually, they were like, how it actually went was something like this. Hey, we're from Sony. We have this thing we want to talk to you about. Would you sign this 500-page non-disclosure agreement first before we even talk to you? It's like, sure. But anyway, so they were like, we really love how you tell stories and and I'd already taught for Sony as well. They had seen that's kind of how they met me, is they had seen my teaching, like because I'm still the only author that's invited to teach writing at Comic-Con San Diego. So now I'm 17 years in a row that I've been teaching there. I actually didn't teach at Gen Con for the first time this year. I taught there for 16 years. So it's funny, like I didn't realize you had Tassin on. Me and Mark are really good friends from a long time ago. But so I'd already taught for them. They'd brought me in as a corporate teacher to kind of help with the EverQuest and EverQuest 2 story devs, the dev team. And when they were doing EQ3, they wanted me to be the kind of the guy to manage, because it wasn't EQ3. It wasn't a third version of the game. What they wanted to do, since they had never really had a real writer, they had hundreds of people that had written on the game. They had plot arcs that, like, you would start a quest, but it never got finished. Because, the game's 22 years old when I got on board. So there was just so many people that had come and go from the company that had started stuff and never finished it or whatever. So with EQ Next, they wanted to do a complete reboot, like from scratch. Yes, they wanted to keep as much of the iconic stuff as they could, but I rewrote. One of the things in playing EverQuest I always thought was stupid was how their backstory on their Dark Elves, how the Dark Elves became Dark Elves. I always thought it was not a well-written backstory. So one of the very first stories that I wrote was a series of novellas on how the Dark Elves were created as Dark Elves. And so I wrote all that. I did work with the dev team. They actually originally hired me also to be on the dev team to actually write quests and all that. And I learned really fast that I'm not interested in doing that. So I backed off of that because writing quests is a whole different ball game. Basically the skinny of the whole thing is I was supposed to be their marketing. It's a 6-year production process. You know, every month they could release a piece of concept art. And so what I was doing was I was writing short stories and novellas that they could release every month or every couple of months to kind of keep the fans interested. But I was still in on all the dev meetings. I still helped them with the backstory. Kind of the way it worked was I was kind of a part of everything that happened of the 10,000 years that happened up to the point where the players started playing. And then, you know, after that, I had nothing to do with. So, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time with them working on stories, but there was 6 others on the dev team, all brilliant people and great writers and storytellers. And so we worked hand in hand together. But when it came to the pros, it was just me. At least in the beginning. I did bring one other writer on, my protege at the time. I ended up bringing on. So eventually there were 2 of us writing stories.
What about your involvement with Shadowrun?
So I haven't done much for Shadowrun. It was, so here's a weird thing. Maybe this is a lesson for people. So before I was a writer, I was in sales and in the IT world, and I trained salespeople. And one of the things that was the hardest thing to train a salesperson is you got to ask for the sale. You have to. And John Helfers, who's the main acquisition director over there at Catalyst that owns the Shadowrun IP, we've been friends for a long time. And we were actually out at a bar at Gen Con, and we had been talking for a little while. And then somebody walked by and he's like, "Oh, give me a second. I really want to talk to this guy." Or girl, I don't remember who it was that he was talking to, but he was like, "You know, I really want you to write for us, and here's the information and everything like that." And then he sat back down, and I was like, "You know, I am a pen for hire," because he had never asked me to write for, you know, BattleTech or Shadowrun or any of those things. And he was like, "Wait a minute, you would write for us?" I'm like, yeah, I like paychecks. It's nice. And he's like, "Holy crap, if you'll write for us, absolutely." So it was kind of if I hadn't have asked, I wouldn't have written for Shadowrun. I still have a contract with them. I just haven't, I mean, I've written, you know, some things in the past, but I just haven't written in a while. Again, there's been a lot of health issues that have taken me out of the game. But one day I would like to get back to doing some stories for them. But so yeah,
novels or stories written in the Shadow World universe. Is that what you were writing for them?
Yeah. Novellas. A lot of that stuff I don't have a lot of time. Like you're gonna announce something that's never been announced before. So when that company approached me, they were like, "You know, we want you to write a series of novels." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I don't have time for that. Like, how about a novella every quarter?" And they're like, "Whatever, we'll take anything." So I'm doing a novella for them once a quarter, and that's kind of the way it is. I you know, every writer has a bandwidth, and I know my bandwidth, and I just don't have room to. And actually, if it wasn't this IP, I would not. Like, they're one of the few IPs that could come to me and actually ask me to write for them, and I would say yes. I'm just too busy.
Well, then let's drop the exclusive here. Apparently, this is the Table Talk exclusive. What series and world that we've talked about here on the live streams before here in His Geekverse are you writing for now?
So I'm going to be the very first, even though it's the oldest fantasy campaign world that exists, I'm going to be the very first prose writer that they've ever brought on board, and that is Harn World.
So I have never played the Harn Master, but we've looked at it on the channel, and I remember evaluating its system when I was thinking about doing a Lord of the Rings campaign. I was like, you know, I was evaluating a whole bunch of different systems. That was one of them, and I loved what I was reading. So what draws you to this system? Why is this the one or this world? Why is this the one that you would write for?
So it's nostalgia. So when I was I started playing D&D when I was 8. Like, I literally had to have my mother read some of the big words to me because I was like, what's dexterity? Like, so she had to read them and tell me what, like, I was really young when I started playing. And when I was probably about 10 or 11, because I was collecting Dragon magazines, I actually literally have every Dragon magazine ever printed, you know, from issue 1 on. But in the back of the Dragon magazine, that was the only place that Harn World advertised. Because, you know, I'm very old, and this is back in the 70s, and actually maybe early 80s, but late 70s, somewhere around in there. And I you know, I like the advertisement, and it was a Canadian company at the time. And so I mail ordered the stuff, and it was just cool. It was the way they laid out their world, because it wasn't a game. It was just a campaign world back in a time when no one made campaign worlds. So I was really intrigued by it. I loved the history. I loved how they laid everything out. I loved the details of the maps and everything like that. But none of my friends would play because it wasn't, at that time, it really had not, they didn't do any magic. It was more of a medieval role-playing game, just feudal, and that was it. And so none of my friends, and my other 11, 12-year-old friends, they were like, that's boring. I don't want to play that. So I ordered everything, just as I would get my allowance, that was one of the things I would just spend it on. And so every month I was ordering something from them until I eventually got their entire catalog. Never played, and really never read all of it, because since no one wanted to play, I just was buying it because I'm a collector. Flash forward 30 years, I still have it. I have everything that I've ever bought because I'm, a true geek. And I was on Kickstarter, and they were kickstarting one of the hardbacks. And I'm like, I don't remember anything about this, but I have everything, so why not? And so I backed the first hardback version of it, and then the second one, and then the third one, and the fourth one. And, over the last couple of years, as they've been releasing the re-released versions for, in hardback, I've just been buying them, not reading them, just getting them in, put them on a shelf, ooh, pretty nice, nostalgic. And this year at Gen Con, they actually had a booth there, probably for one of the first times in a while. And they were giving away one of the big gigantic maps, which I had never gotten. So, I got it digitally, but I never had one of the printed out, wall maps. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go over there, because as an exhibitor, I get to go in before anybody else. And so the door we went in, they were kind of on that side of the room. So I walked by and I was like, oh, can I get one of those maps that you guys are giving away for free? And he was like, yeah, sure. Just the guy I was talking to. And he said, can I get your email to put you on an email list? I'm like, oh, I'm already a Kickstarter backer. And he's like, oh, I have a special list that I'm doing something else. Can I get your email for that? I'm like, sure. And so I give him the email, and he's like, wait a minute, Maxwell Alexander Drake, I know you. And I'm like, I've been around. And he's like, no. Like, I know you. Like, you're a writer. And so I'm like, yeah. And he's like, we got to talking a little bit. So he came over to the booth and he picked up a couple books. And then 2 weeks later, he reaches out to me and he's like, by the way, I'm the owner. And like, you're phenomenal. What do I got to do to get you to write for me? And I'm like, you son of a, like, I don't want to write for you. I did not come looking for work. Like, that is not what I wanted. But pretty much them and Conan would be the only two IPs that I would write for. And I'm like, yes, I will write for you. So I've had to do a lot of reading and a lot of just catching up on that world. And, as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I remember this. Oh, I kind of remember this. But yeah, so it's been a lot of fun.
Sable says, I think regarding the collecting the RPG system, but not necessarily playing. I've done that with more than one game system.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've got quite a few sitting over here on the shelf.
So I've spent way too much money on Kickstarter on campaign worlds and everything like that. I haven't opened a single one of them. I had probably 20 of them. They just look really cool. And I'm like, one day I'm not going to be working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I'm going to be able to play. So my kids are enjoying it. They're older now and they're into role playing and all of that. So they do their thing, and they're pretty much the only ones that are using them. But yeah, I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of either role-playing games or campaign worlds or whatever that I buy off of Kickstarter. It's an amazing time for creators of RPGs. It really is, because you have direct access directly to,
Well, so Robert said, I just love the Harn world. I love the Harn world, and I'm glad to hear that Jake will be working with them. I'll be looking forward to reading these. So
yeah, I'm excited because they've never had a prose writer. So if you're not familiar with Harn world, it's all just like an encyclopedia of history. There's not a lot of personality. There's a lot of, this king did this and this king died here, and there was this big battle here that this was the outcome of. So it's just an amazing amount of information for game masters for that world. But there is no, like, this first thing I'm doing, and I don't know what I'm allowed to say or anything like that. I literally totally forgot that I put it on my website. So you found that
I know. When I mentioned, we'll talk about this, he was like, "How do you know about that?"
Right. He's like, and you're writing for Hardworld now. Let's talk about it. I was like, wait, how do you even know? No one knows that. I'm like, oh. Because when I threw it up on the website, I was just like, yeah, no one, this is brand new. No one's going to be here. So no one's going to see this. I wasn't quite expecting that. But yeah, so like the history, it's a pivotal event. I mean, there's a ton of pivotal events in that world. I mean, like one of the exciting things about it is it only has about 700 years of history. The game's it's over 40 years old, and they've never advanced the timeline. They've only added to what's there. So it is the same year that it was 40 years ago when, and actually the owner isn't the original. It was his dad that was the original. His dad's now retired. So, so for 40 years, they've been creating this one world and the history of this world for DMs to be able to just have this massively detailed world. And again, that's what attracted me to it. I thought that was just the bee's knees. It was awesome. And just I've literally never played the game. And I told him all this. But I really am excited to write it. But this first story that I'm writing, it was that way. It was a lot of history. And I'm like, okay, but there's no personality. Like what was this person like? And what was that? Because I think that was the weirdest, or a little bit of a learning curve for him. Was I kind of think that he was more expecting that I was just going to flesh out the events. And I'm like, no, I'm a storyteller. I have no interest in fleshing out this war or fleshing it. It's like, I have an interest in what it was like to be there as a person. What are their personalities like? What did they learn? How did they grow? What was their, struggle and their sacrifice? And like, I write stories. I don't write history. So that's taken a little while for him to kind of get used to that. But I mean, he's on board for the whole thing. He obviously is a fan of my work. And so he's like, oh, if that's what you got to do to write how you write, then, what do I got to give you? So he's been really, really amicable to making sure that I have all the information I need, or if I need to bounce things off of him, like, because again, there's not a lot of detail on individual personalities. Like it'll mention the king and the name and, who he was married to and what happened. But like, what was this guy like? How did he interact in the world? How did he view the world? Those are things that this doesn't have. So I've got a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom to kind of delve into those and flesh those out as real human beings that are, in a real world doing a real thing. And I say human beings, the first story I'm writing is about dwarves, but they still are real. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I'd like to start a general discussion about, we're going to talk about different things in storytelling and philosophies of stories and stuff like this. But I read this on your website. So I'm bring your website. This is the Starving Writer Studios website up for just a moment, because the first thing I saw there was this Bard's Oath, and I love it. So let's talk about the Bard's Oath here and then what this means. So I saw this. And this is the Bard's Oath on Starving Writer Studios. It says, my role as a storyteller is to transport my audience from the comfort and safety of wherever they are, place them into uncomfortable and perilous situations where I force them to confront and grapple with subjects that push them out of their comfort zone, so that hopefully they may emerge from my narratives as a better human being.
That's just a quote that I've been saying for 20 years. That is my opinion of what my job is. That's my job description. I wrote that. I didn't really write it. I just people who, because I teach writing all over the world. So I said this thing a million times, and it's always, whatever you think your job is as a writer, fine. But here's my job and why I take writing. Storytelling is literally my religion. And so it's everything to me. There's my family and there's writing, and that's it. That's my world. And then of course, geekdom. But yeah, I truly believe every word of that. I believe the job of stories is to make better human beings. That's how we become better people, is through these fictitious tales. That's why they've been told for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, is because people want to be moved by this. They want to, learn a moral lesson, or imagine, and like, that's one of the problems that I have, if we want to really get kind of politically incorrect. One of the biggest reasons why I feel like pretty much every movie and TV show these days are just garbage is, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons is the whole world has started taking heroes and bringing them down more to gray, more to neutral, and villains and bringing them up more to neutral, because the idea behind it is, well, we want to make them more realistic and human. But that's not what a story's about. A story is about, you need someone to look up to in a story. You need someone to hate in a story, because those are the two opposing personalities that are going to force you to grapple with a thematic element that you're not comfortable with. Maybe slavery, maybe racism, maybe, whatever. And so when you start graying everything out, the stories don't move audiences anymore. They don't do anything for you. And so you walk out of there unfulfilled. And it's a shame to me. It's a shame to me that a lot of the stories that are coming, especially in the geekdom, that's what really kills me, is, the geek world has been infested by horrible writers. And I hate it. I really do. It is, because again, this is my religion. So they're blasphemers.
Well, and what you wrote here in the Bard's Oath is, or said, and has been recorded here, is very much a counter to somebody who is looking at something and going, well, maybe it sucks, maybe it's okay, maybe it's just mediocre, whatever. It's just a movie that I went to go and see, or it's just a story. So this is very much a counter to that philosophy of someone who dismisses something as just a movie.
Well, and there are also, entertainment is entertainment. So like Michael Bay. No one goes to a Michael Bay movie to be moved. Like, you're never expecting a Shawshank Redemption when you walk into Transformers. But that doesn't mean that Michael Bay has no value in what he does. Everyone loves to see explosions and bombs and, action and all this other stuff. And I've given him all my money just like everybody else has. But there's no depth there. If I'm scrolling through channels and I see Transformers come on, I'm not even going to slow down. Like, I don't even remember what Shia LaBeouf's character's name was. I don't remember I know he lived, but I really don't remember if he lived or died, because there's nothing of substance in Transformers. Whereas when you look at the exact same type of movie, which is Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton understood what a story is. And so, like, if I'm scrolling through and I see Jurassic Park's on, I'll stop. I'll watch it, because it has depth. It has substance. It has more than just explosions and, big robots and all of that. Not that there's anything wrong with the big robot destroying things movie. I love those. But that can't be all that is available. That's not, it's shallow, it's hollow, it's just eye candy. And while that's fun, I don't get anything from it deep, and that's why, like, I'll never rewatch Transformers, but I've watched Jurassic Park, 6 times, 7 times, who knows? I've watched Shawshank Redemption at least a dozen times, because those movies force you to confront something and to think about something and to aspire to something, because that's really what a story, to get somebody to want to change their lives, you need to give them something in the story that is better than them, that they want to aspire to, that they go, wow, what would I do in that situation? What would I do if I found out that the world was a computer simulation and the entire human race was enslaved as batteries? What would I do? How would I, overcome that situation? How would I see about that? Especially if I learned that I was Jesus Christ. Like, not only do I learn that the world is simulation, you're also telling me I'm Jesus Christ? No, I'm not Jesus Christ. So, like, that's and that's the reason why every Matrix after that was horrible, because they lost it. The Wachowskis completely lost the script on what a story is. And they did such a brilliant job of that first movie, because they gave you something to think about, something to struggle with, something to aspire to. And so that's the stories. That's what I believe, that's my job. And that's what I write. And that's why, the fan base that I have likes what I do.
James says we love Jurassic Park here in the Geekverse. Yes, and we've that's still on the list to actually analyze, to take a deep dive into Jurassic Park itself. Yes, Jurassic Park seems to come up a lot. Everybody's, and the Matrix does too. The Matrix comes up quite a bit too. So, well, okay, let's follow off of that. This goes in a great new direction, but let's follow directly off of that since it was just brought up, and it's something that we grapple with quite a bit here on this show, and that is sort of the nature of good and evil, and whether or not black and white sort of villains and good guys tell more interesting stories, or if having gray villains and gray heroes is better. And we've talked to a number of different people here, and some people have been the advocate of the gray side of things, but it seems like you are pulling in the other direction. And so let's talk about that. So why, if I was right in that you're advocating for more good and evil and not necessarily all stories, but if you advocate for that, why?
So actually I'm not.
Okay.
I mean, you do want to make characters dynamic. I don't have heroes that are all, goody two shoes, and I don't have villains that are all, just evil because they're evil. Those are the old, 1940s, 1950s type of story that, like one of the things when I first started writing and, getting published and everything like that, my grandmother read everything that I did. She's actually the woman who raised me. So my inspiration, she's no longer with us, but she was kind of the reason that I even was able to pursue this career professionally. But that being said, I write epic fantasy. So there's a lot of convolutedness. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of plot arcs, a lot of main characters, it's convoluted. And I remember one time, and matter of fact, I think it was after she read my first published work, she was like, what's wrong with the guy in white riding in and shooting the guy in black and saving the girl? And I'm like, because we don't tell stories that way anymore, Grandma. Like, we've evolved. We're smarter. We want more, dynamic stories. And so I'm not saying that you need this pristine hero that's going to fight this ultimate evil. But you do have to have somebody to look up to, something that you want to aspire to, somebody who does something. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I think the stories about the everyman who is put in a situation that's so far above what his abilities, his natural abilities would be to accomplish. I mean, look at Matrix. I mean, Neo's a programmer, and he's told he's Jesus Christ. You're the savior of humanity. And he's like, no, I'm not. And that's the reason why, I mean, like, if we want to get really geeky and technical and get into the weeds.
That's what we do here.
So I love using the Matrix to teach about the breaks in acts. Because one of the things that I say in my teaching is, you better know when, you better be able to point to the period that is the delineating mark between Act 1 and Act 2. You also need to be able to point to the period that's the delineating mark between the first half of Act 2 and the second half of Act 2. You also need to be able to point to the period that is the delineating mark between Act 2 and Act 3. And the reason for that is because they all have to be written different. Act 1 is not written the same way as the first half of Act 2, which is not written the same way as the second half of Act 2, which is not written the same way as Act 3. If you don't know where that delineating mark is, how do you write different? And so one of the beautiful things about the Matrix is it's the quintessential perfect example of it. So if we look at Act 1, we go through the Everman moment, we get introduced to Neo as Mr. Anderson at the time. Now, the point of no return and the end of Act 1 happens to be the same thing. The point of no return doesn't always have to be the end of Act 1. It can happen earlier in Act 1 where you just can't go back. And then, you can still go into, like, Star Wars. Star Wars: A New Hope. The point of no return is when Luke Skywalker goes home after, Ben gives him the magic sword and says, your father was a warrior in this war and you should come with me. And he's like, man, thanks for the magic sword. This is really cool. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble with this as a teenager, but I don't want your war. I'm out. I'm going. And then he goes home and his parental figures, I know it's his aunt and uncle, but his parents are dead on the lawn. And Obi-Wan's like, oh yeah, no, the Empire's going to kill you now. You may want to run. That's the point of no return. We can't go back to our old life. There's only forward from there. But that's not going into Act 2. That is not the threshold. That is not crossing into the strange new world. The the end of Act 1 ends when they drop out of hyperspace. And they're like, that's no moon. That's where the end of Act 1 happens. And if you look, it changes. The pacing of the movie changes. We speed up a little bit from before then to after then. Same thing in The Matrix. So the point of no return and the end of Act 1 is Morpheus. You want the red pill? You want the blue pill? Which do you want? Because once he makes that decision, he can't go back. And also, you're now in Act 2. It's sort of like, it's really easy to see the delineating mark in Wizard of Oz, because it's, hey, the yellow brick road, that's how you get to Act 2 right there. Just walk that road and you're in Act 2. So you need to know this stuff. But you also need to know what your mid-Act 2 climax. So many people miss that mid-Act 2 climax, and they just jumble it all together. And I am talking about a traditional hero's journey here. There's variations of it, and there's also, there's redemption arcs, there's revenge arcs, there's all sorts of structures that we can go down that have different rules. So I am literally focusing on just the hero's journey here. But that mid-Act 2 climax needs to do several things. It needs to give the character what they need that they're missing, the big thing. And it's usually an esoterical thing. But it's also the delineating mark between, in the first half of Act 2, we're gaining stuff. In the second half of Act 2, the story needs to now come after the hero. So now, again, while the first half of Act 2 is written faster than Act 1, there needs to be something happens, and then things change, and it gets bigger. So the reason why I like using The Matrix is, once we're in the Nebuchadnezzar and we are learning, I learned Kung Fu, and, the woman in red, and, what if he makes the jump? All of that stuff is the hero gaining all of the things he's going to need to overcome at the end. But we don't really know what that is yet. Now, he's told he's the one. He's told he's Jesus Christ. He's told all that stuff. And he's like, I'm not. There's no way. So what does Neo really need? What would he really need to be able to actually become Jesus? Well, he needs to believe that he's not. Because if you tell him that he is, then he's going to act a different way, and he's never going to be able to actually do the things he needs to do to prove to himself that he's Jesus. And so the mid-Act 2 climax is the Oracle. So not only does it give us our esoteric moment where she's like, sorry, kid, you got spunk, but you're not the one. Because that's what he needs. If she said, oh, yeah, no, you're the one. Absolutely. And she knew, obviously, that he was the one. Mm-hmm. But if she had told him that, then how does he prove to himself that he's the number one? He goes and rescues Morpheus. But why does he go to rescue Morpheus? Because he's not the one. And so he says to himself, matters. Right. I don't matter. Morpheus matters. He's going to find the one. He thinks I'm the one, and I'm not. The Oracle told me I'm not. If I don't go do this, yes, I'm going to die. Okay, great. I'm not important to the story. Morpheus is important to the story. I'm not going to let him die for me because I'm not the one. I'm a secondary character. He needs to find the hero. And so without being told, you're not the one, kid, he wouldn't have done that. He would have gone, well, I mean, Morpheus did his job. He found me, and I'm it. I'm the shiznit, and it would not have happened, if we wanted to just write that version of it, it would be, I would write it more as a tragedy as opposed to a feel-good story. But what happens after that? What happens after they leave the Oracle? Everything changes. You get the glitch in the Matrix, ooh, deja vu. What do you mean? Oh, and now it's running and gunning and everybody dies, and Neo has to fight Agent Smith in the little train tunnel, like all of it. Everything changes once you get into the second half of Act 2. But we make it out of there. We have everything we need. Where's the delineating mark between Act 2 and Act 3? That's when he goes back. Now we have an overcome. The overcome is we have to save Morpheus. And so when he sits down in the chair and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm not important. And I know that now. Now we are leaving Act 2 and moving into Act 3. Which, again, they did so much. They followed the hero's journey so perfect. That's why I like using this. So we have our false overcome where Neo dies. I mean, and that's the most quintessential all hope is lost moment you can have. Your hero's dead. it's not like Luke Skywalker with Darth Vader on his tail and he's going to die, which isn't all. That's the all hope is lost moment in Star Wars. Neo's dead. He took 6 bullets to chest. And if that's a spoiler for anybody, the movie's like 20 years old. Come on. You'll lose your geek card if you haven't seen that movie. Sorry, my throat's going. I did my podcast on Thursdays too, so I've already spent 4 hours rambling on. So what's our rescue from without? In Star Wars, Han Solo's the rescue from without. He comes in, shoots Darth Vader in the butt, and then says, "You're all clear, kid." So we have our rescue from without. Trinity is the rescue from without in the Matrix. She literally whispers in, because Neo's kind of in 2 places. His body is in the Nebuchadnezzar, but his soul and mind are in the Matrix. And she's like, "Dude, you can't die. You actually are Jesus Christ." And I know this because the Oracle said I'd fall in love with the Jesus, and I love you. And at its heart, it's really a love story. And he hears that and goes, "Oh, wow." And that's when he finally is able to move to the other side of the theme, accept that he is Jesus Christ. And then the move, he does the actual overcome.
Well, let me Fact Totem, I've got your comment starred. But let me ask you this, going back to the idea of the black and the white and the gray then, which is where this started.
Oh, right.
I like I know some people who read Lord of the Rings or try to or whatever, and they say, "I can't identify with Aragorn. I don't like it for that reason." They much prefer, let's say, Jon Snow, the analogous character in The Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. So you've got, and I actually do think that George R.R. Martin's Jon Snow is commentary on Aragorn. I happen to love both of those. I love Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, but one of them does have more. It's not completely black and white, but you've got good and evil presented in one particular way in Lord of the Rings that some people like and some people don't. And then you go to a much more gray kind of style in A Song of Ice and Fire, which some people like and some people don't. It's like, my God, this is all this kinds of gray. So if we're not advocating for just the guy in white shoots the guy dressed in black, but that we also, or you were talking about that if everything is gray, then what's the point, or what are we drawing out of this? How do we come up with the right medium, or how do we square this circle?
So again, it's not about the characters need to be dynamic. I don't write anyone that's goody two shoes or just evil for the sake of being evil. They do need to be dynamic to be relatable, to the audiences of today. Because look, I mean, when was Lord of the Rings written? In the 40s, published in 1954. Like, that is that time period of storytelling, that my grandmother grew up in. That's why, she was fine with that. What I mean is that you no longer look up to anybody. There's no one that does anything of any value on the good side, and they've made the villains too relatable. They're just your uncle, and yeah, he's doing a couple bad things, but he's an all right good guy for the most part. So you don't hate him enough for him to be a true villain, and you don't aspire to be the hero enough to actually be moved by that hero's journey and that hero's growth arc. That's really what I'm talking about.
Okay. Let me follow this question. Then we're talking about well-rounded characters. I've been having this discussion with a couple of different people, including Brianna, who people will know from this live stream. And I think one of the issues that we're having is a definitional issue, because she and I have also written together, so it's not like we're a chasm apart on this issue. But we're talking about well-rounded characters and whether or not you need them and what that even means. So that's why I think we have a definitional issue about what a well-rounded character is. Because at least according to one understanding of the subject, I tend to advocate for we don't really need well-rounded characters. And it's for this reason. I would say I love Star Trek. And here's according to this definition, what I would say. You've got Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Heart, logic, and spleen, that they're bringing. And if you're doing like a movie, you only have so much time anyway. And so, like, I'm saying that, like, when Spock is in the scene, he needs to bring Spock. He's bringing logic. That's why I need him to bring that perspective to that scene. when McCoy shows up, and he needs to say something from the emotion side, and he needs to bring that to that. When Kirk shows up, he needs to be bravado, and I want that to come across in the story. And that's one of the reasons why I love the interplay between these characters. And I think you talk about in dynamic story creation that you're talking about watching basically the internal play out in 3 different characters. But that doesn't mean, so that's why I say, do I need McCoy to be real well-rounded? Well, I don't. I need him to bring his side of the argument every time he shows up. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to relate to McCoy, or we don't need to understand why he is like he is. Like, there can be reasons for that. So can you help shed light on this subject about this value, or this thing that I'm trying to think about in my head that apparently I'm not articulating very well? If you understand at all what I'm trying to say.
I do. But I want to take a step back.
Okay.
Because I think you're missing one value. So one of the weird things about me as a writer is I write in so many different mediums. You'll very rarely meet a writer that can work in TV and in movies and in novels and in, comics and in everything, games or whatever. And I think the reason for it, like Kirkman, I love Kirkman. I love The Walking Dead. I'm a huge fan. If you've ever read his prose, his novels, they're awful. They're just god awful, because he's writing it the exact same way you write comic books. The only reason why I feel like I'm successful in so many different mediums is every one of them I learned as if they were a brand new language. I don't, okay, I know prose. What does that got, jack to do with writing stage plays? Nothing. So learn it all from scratch. You're talking about 2 different mediums. And so when you get really esoteric about this and go to, the insanity level, the canvas of a screenplay is visual. It is what we can see. It is delineated by the sides of that movie screen or the TV, whatever. And that's it. For prose, the canvas is the reader's imagination, which is almost unlimited. And so there is a depth that you can get in prose that you cannot get anywhere else. It just doesn't exist in comics or in movies. Now, you're also, and I'm not saying this disparaging. I'm not picking on you or whatever. Just everybody does it. You also, and I'll say it this way: you may be falling into the trap that there is a lot of story in Star Trek now. So, it's different from if you just watch the pilot or, just season 1. You're not going to get that depth. You get that depth in TV over time. That's when you start growing the characters, because you can do a little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece here. And, you run a show for 10 years, in movies and everything else, you got a lot of canvas that you eventually accumulate. But if you look at, Captain Pike in the pilot of Star Trek, there's none of that there. Like, it's not. So you're getting this advantage of a lot of material that you're consuming and putting all together into a story. At least I think. I mean, I could be wrong on it. Again, I'm not trying to, tell you what you're thinking or anything like that.
No. This is a dialogue, so that's fine.
Right.
Okay, let's we're going to talk about Star Wars here, but let me come up with 2 comments that we see here. Factotum says regarding the story structure, because we talk about story structure a lot here on Table Talk. Factotum says, I'm curious whether or not you were advocating, this is we're talking about the hero's journey, whether we were advocating writing to fit the structural template, or if the structure is something that we apply after the story is told to help shape the editing. So you understand that question? What's the relationship with the story structure? Because like I said, we talk a lot about structure here.
So there's no right way to write a story. There is a bunch of wrong ways to write it for you. So one of the things that I hate about Stephen King is his ultimatum of, if you're not a pantser, if you're not a discovery writer, you're not a real storyteller. He's very hateful to plotters. But that's because for Stephen King, being a plotter is the wrong way to write. It doesn't mean it's the wrong way to write. It depends on the individual. So my answer to that would be, when you're learning, when you're on that road, try it every way. Start with a structure and go through and follow it to the T. Bend it some. Maybe just write free flow a story and then go in the editing phase and do it. You're going to have to experiment, because there is a right way for every single person to create stories. but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a right way to write stories. There's a right way for you. And so that would be my answer, because I don't think there is an answer to that. And that's why I hate when writers go, oh, you must do it this way. No, you must do it that way. The rest of us have nothing to do with that. I mean, it may work for some of us. It may not work for some of us. So I do dislike questions like that, because there is no real answer to it. And if any author does, writer does give you the definitive answer, that's the definitive answer for them. That doesn't mean it's going to do anything to help you out as a writer. So, I mean, I know it's a wishy-washy answer maybe, but that is my truth. That's what I've seen my entire life as a writer, because some people get to stories that are brilliant in ways that I'm just like, I could never write a story. That's a dumb way to write a story. But it's not a dumb way. It's a dumb way for me. If I tried to write like that, I would fail miserably. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that's not a cop-out answer. That is the answer I've been given for years, because I do truly believe that you need to figure out what's the right way for you to write stories.
Hey, Phaser Risk,
my way.
You really need to read all that, to watch all this Phaser Risk, because we were just talking about the Matrix. We went through a lot of the Matrix. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. So James, from talking about the Lord of the Rings, James Bacon says this. Yes, I agree. All due respect, but the Lord of the Rings is, to this day, one of the most beloved stories of all time. It crosses time period, language, and culture. Can you explain what you mean when you suggest stories are from their time? Yeah, I think it resonates. I still love it. It resonates with me today. It's one of my favorite stories. It resonates with a lot of people today. Yep. So yeah, what do you mean by that?
I'm just talking about the simplicity. So again, this is going to get... That's the problem of having some of these discussions, because the topics are actually deeper than we ever go. So first of all, here's a funny thing about Lord of the Rings. So, I teach all over the world. I'm in rooms of anywhere from 100 to 500 people, whatever. And when we get onto the topic of Lord of the Rings, one of the things that I've done for years, because I'm interested in it, is I will ask the audience, and these are geek audience, because I also teach it, whatever, that aren't necessarily geeks. But when I'm in front of a big geek crowd and this comes up, I'll go, okay, by show of hands, how many people in this room have started Lord of the Rings but never finished? Half. Every time. Half. Half the people can't read that book, because it is an older way of storytelling. They get disconnected from it from that. Now, that aside, that's the writing. What you're talking about are themes. Themes are human. If I want to write a story about the pain of losing a child, you don't have to have children to be moved by that story. You don't have to have lost a child to be moved by that story. Every single human being on this planet can empathize with what it must feel like to lose a child, because it's a human theme. And so what Tolkien and all stories that have lasted through time, what they've done is they've capitalized on really moving human thematic elements that it really doesn't matter when you're born. And so why is the Bible still so relevant for so many people? Because the same themes of adultery or greed or, evil or good or whatever in all the millions of stories that are in that book are still relevant to people today. Whether you like religion or not, I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about the stories of the Bible. They still move us on a human level, because themes are eternal. Greed, the 7 deadly sins, greed, lust, sloth, and all of those. We all get those. And it doesn't matter if you were born 5,000 years ago or you're going to be born 5,000 years from now. Humanity is going to be humanity, because that's just the way it is. And so the reason why Lord of the Rings still is relevant today is because we're the same people in the base, from a thematic element. We're still moved. We still understand that greed is bad. We still understand that you should try and be better and help people out. We still understand what it means to lose a loved one, or, fail in a task or whatever. Those are all things that every human understands. That's why if you don't have a theme, you don't have a story. It's that simple. Theme is everything. And this goes back to the Bard's Oath, because that's what moves people. I mean, why is it that nobody really is moved by a Michael Bay movie? Because he doesn't care about theme. In every Michael Bay movie, the only theme, because if you don't have a theme, you have a theme. You can't tell a story without a theme. But you'll have one accidentally, and it usually is a very weak good versus evil theme. And that's what every Michael Bay movie has at its core. Its thematic element is a very weak good versus evil. And since he never focused on it, it's never enough to actually move you. Jurassic Park's theme, which was very relevant at the time, a little less relevant now, but it's still a human theme, is the fear of technology, and maybe we shouldn't dabble in certain things. That's relevant today. I mean, right now, today, what is the big, gigantic terror that science is going to unleash upon the human race and kill us all? What is it?
AI.
Exactly. But in the 80s and 70s, it was DNA splicing. And could we actually bring back dinosaurs? And oh my God, if they do that, they're going to kill us all. Like, it's still the same thing.
It's the same question that you're asking. It's just embodied in a different thing in a different time.
So the reason why Jurassic Park is relevant even today is not because we're terrified of science bringing back dinosaurs, which is funny because now there's actually an actual company that's actually working on that. But we still are afraid of what our brains can do to us as a society. That is still a human thing. I mean, I guarantee you, a million years ago, people were like, don't be messing with that fire. What are you doing? You'll kill us all. Like, no. So it's timeless. And so why does Lord of the Rings resonate? It's not the writing. It's not the characters. It's the fact that the thematic elements that he brings and forces you to consume are still relevant today as they were back in the 1940s, as they were back in the 1840s, as they were back in, 200 BC. That's what it is. And so again, these are a lot deeper than just rounded characters, because stories are so much more than that when you really dig into them.
And on that subject, Factotum says Kirk, Spock, etc. are the same character. Their aspects or facets of the character of the Enterprise leadership.
Yeah,
and
it's a 5-man band in 3 people. It's just a 5-man band trope. That's all it is.
You talk about that. This was one of the first revelations. Like I said, this was the first book that I read that I was like, oh my God, this was actually helping me write a story. When you were talking about that internal argument that we all deal with between different parts of ourselves played out externally, and that's Kirk, Spock, and McCoy.
Yeah, which is why they don't actually grow, because they're allegories. They're not actual characters.
Right. Yes. That's an important realization too. Why doesn't Spock change? Speaking in the broad here, on the round, why doesn't Kirk change? Why doesn't McCoy change? It's because every time they need to bring those elements to the discussion that they're all going to wrestle with.
They are allegories for what you say. They're allegories for logic. They're allegories for humanity. They're allegories for bravado, or the masculine hero. They're not actual people. They're ideas. And so they can't grow. And that's the weird thing about when you get into external story arcs. So if we look at, the ones that I use for example of a lot, because most people have either read them or seen them, is Lord of the Flies and V for Vendetta. Both those are external story arcs. No character is internally struggling with anything during that. You might say Vi is from, V for Vendetta, the Natalie Portman character, but not really. She's just the audience, and what she's struggling with is just understanding the world that she lives in. And she is the proxy that for us. She is us trying to learn this very complicated topic of, because what is the theme of V? It's, should you give up? And it's talk about so relevant today. V for Vendetta is about, should you give up safety for freedom, or should you give up freedom for safety? That's a timeless human struggle. And right now, one side of that equation is winning. But back then, the other side was winning. And so it's still a relevant story today, even though society has flipped and they now feel a different way. And I don't mean everybody, but that is the current fight of planet Earth. So but it's an external story arc. So there is no character that's going to design anything. V is literally not a character. He's an allegory for you must give up safety for freedom. Freedom is everything. And the government is not a character. It is an allegory for no, you must give up freedom for safety. Safety is everything. And so when you have an external story arc, no character makes a decision. The world makes a decision. So just like in Lord of the Flies, Jack is not a character. He is an allegory for all people are born evil. And Ralph is not a character. He's an allegory for all people are born good. They never change. The world has to make that decision. And so in V for Vendetta, the world is the actual people of the city. And so when they go to the government and there's the army between them, it's the army and the crowd that are going to decide which are we going to do. Are we going to give up safety and have freedom? Or are we going to give up freedom and have safety? And we could have done it either way. The army could have slaughtered the citizens. And if the army slaughtered the citizens, it would have been, oh, yeah, the message of this is safety is really the most important thing. But they didn't. The citizens just walked through and the army did nothing, which showed you that the world is saying, no, freedom is more important. Freedom is more important than safety in every day. And then in Lord of the Flies, Golden hated humanity. He literally hated all of us. So he was trying to prove that we're all born evil. We're all just pieces of garbage, which is why at the end, when they kill Piggy and all the boys are like, oh, crap, we just killed a child. It could have gone either way. The other boys could have gone, oh, man, Jack, all right, we've taken this too far, man. That was all fun and games, but we killed Piggy. Like, we're going to have to take a step back. That would prove that humanity is born good. But that's not what happened. They went, yay, we killed Piggy. Let's kill Ralph now. And so Golding proved that. And again, he proved it in the story. I don't believe that, but that's what he proved. But why does it still relevant? Because we all struggle with, was I born evil or was I born good? So it's still a relevant title. It doesn't matter which way the story proves it. Even though I don't buy into that, I think most humans are good. I think there's plenty of bad people, but the vast majority of us are actually good people of every race and every culture and every language and every religion. But all of those also have, 20% pieces of garbage. And so we have to have society the way we have it because of that percentage. But those are external. So sorry, that's where I was going with that.
All right. Well, okay. Here is the question that I have wanted to talk to you, or the topic I've wanted to talk to you about for years, because at Gen Con Writer Symposium years and years ago, you said that I have an explanation for why the prologue of Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie, A New Hope now, is unnecessary. But you said, it's not important to this discussion. Ask me sometime later. And I've never gotten to you to be able to do that. And now I have you, so I'm going to ask. Because I've also been analyzing Star Wars because people say the hero's journey. Okay, write a hero's journey story. Okay, look at Star Wars. And I was having trouble actually with the first of it because I was like, what's going on in Star Wars? And I actually, personally, I think that the start of Star Wars is strange, is done kind of strangely. And if you don't realize, because everybody's like, hero's journey, look at Star Wars. But if you don't realize that some of the beginning of Star Wars is actually a bit strange, you may actually have trouble plotting and lining up what's actually happening in this. And so I've always recalled your tease that you have this. And I was like, now I wonder what he's going to say. And I wonder if it happens to be the same type of revelation that I had with regard to this. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to you. What is the prologue of Star Wars and why is it unnecessary?
Well, again, I need to take a step back.
Okay.
First of all, like I said, there is no absolutes. So I'm going to speak in absolutes because it's my opinion, but it's my opinion. So if you disagree, it doesn't mean you're wrong. I mean, I'm always right, but it doesn't mean you're wrong. So what I'm really talking about is from a prose standpoint. Again, different medium. Movie is a different medium. Screenplays are a different medium than prose. If you're writing a novel and you're writing a prologue and you're wondering if it's good or not, all I need to do is read one word to tell you that you don't need it. And that's the word prologue. It's bad. So and again, this really has to do with if we're writing Star Wars as a novel.
Okay.
Now, does it work as a movie? I still don't think it does. And I still don't think it's needed. But it's a different medium, so you can get away with it. The reason why I don't think you could get away with it if Star Wars wasn't a movie, but was just a novel. Like, who? So for me, as a storyteller, the reason why prologues don't work is because what writers have to understand is writing is about selling. You have to earn the reader's loyalty every step of the way. There's only one person who loves the story on page 1, and that's the writer. There's only one person that loves every character in the story, and that's the writer. That's why head hopping ruins stories so bad, because you're like, oh, but I love every one of my characters, and I'm just giving you insight into all their heads because they're all amazing. Like, no, they're all amazing to you. I want to be in the head of the hero or the heroes, and that's it. I don't want to be in the head of all these other idiots. You love them. I never will, because you'll never earn a reader's loyalty at that level. So the problem with a prologue is, like, let's say the most common one is something where you're like, oh, I'm going to show the reader what this character really loves, and so that they'll fall in love with the character. So it opens up with a dream sequence, and I dream that my house is on fire and my wife and kids are in there and I just can't save them, and I watch them die. And then I wake up and the writer's like, yeah, see, you're so connected. Like, no, I don't know this guy. I don't know his wife and kids. I don't care about any of these people. Let them burn. I don't care. Now, connect me to the character. Then connect me to his love for his family. Then give me that dream. Now it has an impact on me, because you already love them, but I don't. And so it doesn't have the impact that you think it has. The other type of prologue that people do is they're trying to build the world, and it still falls in the same thing. I don't care about your world. You do. You have to make me care first. And how you make me care is connect me to something, somebody. It's a human connection. It's not, I don't care about desert planets. What does that mean to me? I don't care about spaceships. I care about the individual people. That's what readers care about. That's what your moviegoers care about. And again, movies a different medium, so you can get away with a little bit more. Books are way more personal and in depth, which is why you have to be a little bit smarter when you're dealing with a novel as opposed to a screenplay. So the reason why it doesn't work is, okay, great. I see this big evil guy. I don't know who he is. I don't care. I see this princess. I don't know who she is. I don't care. I see these droids and this plans. I don't care. Now, if we were to cut that and just start on Tatooine, just start meeting Luke and he's doing his moisture farming, and we're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. What's going on with this? Oh, he's buying some droids. Oh, look, he found this message. That's weird, but he's just going to scrub it. Okay, all right. Wait a minute. One of the droids ran away. Well, he's got to go get it. Like, and now we're going to start actually caring about this character as we learn the story. So the prologue just doesn't do what you think it does. It just doesn't. Now it's visual, so the fight scenes and all that, obviously in a visual medium, that is a bonus. That does help hook the readers, in this case, the audience. But a visual medium, you can Michael Bay it. I have verbed his name. Yes. You can Michael Bay a bunch of explosions and get the audience excited. But there's no visual explosions in a prose book. You're going to go, and then it went bang, and then it went boom. Like, nobody cares. So that's why I said that. And I still believe this to this day.
So you would start Star Wars then. If you want to say, as you're writing a book, then if you're writing a book, you would start Star Wars with Luke dealing with his everyday problems right there, and then have his initiation of the story be, hey, I got these droids, and my God, one of them's got a weird message. That's where you would start.
Yep. I would first make you care about Luke, care about his plight, care about his, it's the everyman moment. That's literally what he was doing. I mean, George had the advantage of, he literally went to Joseph Campbell's class, and Professor Campbell taught him the hero's journey, the guy who literally created the hero's journey, by studying stories for the last 5,000 years. He was a student in the class. So he got a little advantage over a lot of us. And when he wrote Star Wars, he just was like, well, Professor Campbell said, I need an everyman moment. Professor Campbell said, I need, this moment and that moment. And that's why when I do teach my hero's journey class, I use Star Wars: A New Hope, because it is, every step of the way. So, yeah. Does that make sense now?
Well, yes. So here was the issue, or the issue that I was having, and the realization that I came to. Okay, now let's say that you do want to start on action. Let's say you are doing a film. So this iconic, we're going to start with this space battle in order to get people involved. So let's start with the Star Destroyer attacking the blockade runner. The weird part of it that I came to realize is that the princess tasks the droid. We get to task the droid to go and get the plans to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And our main character shows up very late in the movie. And it's by roundabout, the princess tasked the droid to get to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in the middle of that someplace, because they go through the Jawas and all of that, and then they bump into our main character. And basically, I was saying there's an association between Luke Skywalker and R2-D2. Because R2-D2 is basically carrying the football, and then he kicks it over to Luke Skywalker, and then you start Luke's story late. We're talking about today's movies or today's stories or things like that. When I was talking to Cameron, and he was like one thing that you can't do in your movie script today is introduce Luke Skywalker as late as Luke Skywalker is introduced in the original story. So I was like, the conclusion that I came to then was like, okay, if you want to start with this space battle and start on action, have all the pizzazz that you're talking about with all of the action and stuff like that, Princess Leia needs to hand those plans not to R2-D2, but to Luke Skywalker. That you should have started Luke Skywalker as a nobody on the blockade runner, a lowly mechanic or something who sees the princess and knows she's somebody important on there. And instead of turning to a droid, she should have gone, hey, you're still giving it to a nobody, basically, but instead of a droid, you give it to Luke Skywalker. If you're going to tell that, you need to put Luke Skywalker on the blockade runner.
Yeah, that is a fix for that. Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. That would speed it up.
But again, there is a big difference between the visual medium and the and prose, like I said. So I have a love-hate relationship with opening with an action scene. I love to hate it. That's my love-hate relationship. So pull up the cover of Farmers and Mercenaries just real quick, just so they can see the cover, because I'm going to talk about that character.
Mercenaries?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the main character is this lion dude, and so I just wanted you to see a picture of it so you'll have a better reference for the story that I'm going to tell. Or I can just grab it and hold it. Okay.
That's right here?
Yeah. So that's the cover of my very first published work. My editor on that was a guy named Patrick Labruto. He was Raymond Feist's first editor. He was Isaac Asimov's editor for a while. He was Stephen King's editor. He's very, very big. He loves to say his claim to claim is he was the first American editor to reject Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because he said it would never sell. Obviously, he was wrong. So he was my first editor. And when he picked up the book and read it, he's like, man, you got spunk, kid. However, so the book started with the lion dude. His name's Klain. It started with him in a cell. And nothing happens in that chapter. That's chapter 1. That's the opening chapter. You're just in the cell. No one goes into the cell. He does not leave the cell. Some people come and talk to him through the door, but that's it. That's all that happens. And then in his next chapter is actually where they got the cover from. He's thrown out into this arena, fighting for his life he's basically like a gladiator at that point. I'm kind of famous for writing fights. My fights people tend to like them. So when Labruto read that, he was like, dude, I have never read, and this is his words, not mine. I'm not bragging on myself. He said, I've never read somebody who writes fight scenes as good as you. Like, your fight scenes are amazing. You must start this book there. You must start the book in this fight scene. It's amazing. It's awesome. It's where your book starts. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. And he's like, kid, I'm Patrick Labruto. I've been doing this for 30 years. You're a nobody. You've never even been published yet. Just do what I'm telling you. I'm like, okay, all right, you're right. I am a nobody. So I spent a couple weeks, I probably spent about 5-6 weeks rewriting. I had to rewrite the first 9 chapters to turn it so that the fight scene was the opening chapter. And I turned it into him, and he's like, yeah, I'm right, huh? I'm like, no, I don't really like it. He's like, I'm Patrick Labruto. I know everything. I'm good. A couple weeks later, he calls me up, maybe not even a couple weeks. It was probably only 4 or 5 days later. He calls me up and he's like, all right, I'm going to say something to you that I've never said to a first-time author. And if you ever tell anybody I said this, I will swear that you're lying. You're right. This isn't as good. And I don't know why, because the fight scene is still amazing. I'm like, because you get to meet an 8-foot tall, 900-pound lion dude ripping the crap out of people. You don't care. Without that moment in the cell and getting to know Klain outside of violence, you don't care about the scene in the violent scene. And so it was published the way I had originally written it.
Oh, you got your original writing in. You got your.
Well, he didn't like it. He was like, this doesn't work. I don't care about this character. I'm like, of course you don't. Because you don't get that moment with him. You don't get to know Klain as a character, as a person, as somebody who has, sentience and feelings and, is struggling with internal things and conflicts and doubts and fears. You just see a 700-pound lion dude ripping the crap out of people. No one cares. And that's the thing that most writers miss about their own work. They care, but you got to earn the concern and care of your readers. And so, yeah, it got published the way I had originally written it, because you have to have it. So, and again, video is different. So my award-winning children's movie, Snurse, A Magic Fairy Tale, someone's looking at it right now, but it's one of my favorite stories. So I actually kind of did it. It was the only thing I could work on during cancer treatment. Cancer treatment is the horror show that it is advertised as. I highly recommend that everyone avoid it if you can. It's not fun. So I took the screenplay and I wanted to get something out. And I just added, because if you've ever read a screenplay, they are awful to read. You really have to understand how to read a screenplay to understand the story and everything else about it. But I wanted to get out to the fans. So I added about 50 pages of prosy type stuff to it that you're not allowed to put in a screenplay. It's one-liners. It's one-liner here between this piece of dialogue, one-liner there between it's emotion and, maybe some action, some motion, something like that. So now it's a really fun read for all ages. And it is available on Amazon or on Starving Writer Studio. Still kind of in screenplay mode, because I couldn't write prose during that time, but I could add a line here and then add a line there. It actually opens in a dream, which is something you're told never to do. Because one of the things you have to do, especially in a children's movie, because not only is it medium specific, it's also genre specific and age specific. So there's a lot of things to understand and why things are so different. So one of the big things that you really need to do in a children's movie is almost emulate a 5-act play. So a lot of people, it's old, so we really don't know what 5-act plays are anymore. Why does Romeo and Juliet start with, hey, this is a story about two kids that love each other, but they're from different families who hate each other, and so they're not allowed to marry, but they do anyway, but at the end they kill themselves. Like, that's act 1. That's the story. Why? Because back in the 1300s, 1400s, there were only two types of people that watched plays. The elite that actually could read, or the vast majority were illiterate people who were drunk at the time. So if you didn't spell out the story to them, they would get lost through the course of it. So the reason for the creation of a 5-act play is you have to give them the entire story before you give them the story, or they're not going to follow it. That was just the way people were during that time. Children, kind of, sort of in the same vein. They're not illiterate drunks, but they kind of are. So children's movies have to start in a way that you wouldn't start other things. And so in this dream, you get this esoteric version of the movie. You know exactly what Snurse is striving for. He wants magic more than anything else. You know that he can't have magic. He wants to be a hero more than anything else, but he's a nobody little fizz bear, which, they're just basically the underling workers in this world. Like, you get all this in the dream. And then you go on the quest. You go on the actual story and you do everything through there. So, there's an example where I have an award-winning screenplay that starts in a dream. And yet I literally just said in our meeting, you don't start in a dream. That's stupid. Never do that. Because you really can't to an adult because they don't care yet. But kids, another reason why you can, like, Snurse is the only story that I've ever written that I followed the hero's journey to the T. Snurse is literally, it's not only written so close to the hero's journey that one of the main characters knows she's in a story and is commenting on it. She's like, oh, look, we're in Act 2 now. And oh, look, this is this. And this is like, she's literally calling out elements of story structure as they're going through the story. But why can I get away with that? Because an 8-year-old hasn't read 5,000 stories that are built off the hero's journey or watched 5,000 movies that are built off the hero's journey. You have a lot more flexibility with that age group. So again, there's a lot that you have to think about when you're crafting your tales. And it's a lot more than just what you think is cool. And then I guess the thing I would add to that is everything is a risk. So I do a monthly open Q&A every month. If anybody wants to get involved with that, go to drakeu.com/Zoom and you can sign up for it and you'll get the Zoom link every month. The first Tuesday of every month, I do an open Q&A, and January is going to be the second Tuesday because holidays. But this last Tuesday was this month's because it got pushed. Or was this the first Tuesday? I think this was the first Tuesday. I'm sorry. Calendars are hard for me because I have no real job.
I know my days are all the same too.
Right. We got on this really interesting discussion about that exact thing. How does the hero journey work? How much can you bend it? How much can you break it? What can you get away with? Why, do 80% of all stories today follow the hero's journey, or at least some semblance of the hero's journey? I mean, this is the stuff that I think about outside of, writing stories and creating characters and all of that.
Okay, let's talk about tragic characters and tragic arcs. Because you touch on this a little bit in dynamic story creation and what it requires to do a tragic arc. We have another author in the chat, Adrian Smitley, who is Phaserist. So Phaserist is in the chat, who has written a lot more about this in his book. I guess I should show his book too, The Stomping Kitten. So get this one. So this one this one has some information on the tragic character. This one actually goes into a lot more kind of detail on it. So let's talk about that. Let's say you want to write a tragic arc. How do you do that, and how do you do that successfully?
It still comes down to the fact that you have to move the audience. So one of the comic books that is in limbo of mine is a comic book called Dead Ned. The artist was Cyril Vanderhagen. He's a really big time Magic the Gathering artist, good friend of mine. But artists are selfish, and he went and got cancer as well that he's been fighting for like 10 years. So he hasn't done any of the art because, he's just selfish. No, he actually has been struggling. So I don't want to do it with another artist, even though I've created the story. But I created the story because he challenged me. He said, can you write a story where the main protagonist is just a piece of garbage? And so I thought about it for a while, and it ended up not being that, but that is where it started. So the story of Dead Ned is basically, it's a Cthulhu Western, and it opens with Nathaniel Boone, a marshal, basically getting in a gunfight, a standoff with a really bad character and getting killed. And then he wakes up next to his grave. And being undead sucks. And he's in a lot of pain, and he doesn't want to be undead. So the beginning of it is him going and trying to figure out how to end his life. He cannot take this. And he eventually figures out that the reason for it and all of that, and I'm not going to get into it, but he finds the person responsible for this whole curse and everything like that. It's actually a priest that was traveling with Cortez. So 300 years before this, because the thing takes place in like the 1880s. So about 300 years before that, this priest was with Cortez and dealing with the Aztecs, and something happened to him and he was cursed, and, now he's here. So he finds this priest, and the priest is like, oh yeah, no, I'm going I'm going to finish this. You need to help me. That's why you're here. I'm collecting, the curse spreads out, but you're here to help me. We're going to open a portal and let all these gods in, and they're going to destroy all of humanity. They're going to eat us all. And that's kind of I've always thought it was stupid, the whole Cthulhu thing where you'd worship like, oh, I'm going to worship a god that's going to come in and eat me. Why? Why would you worship that? So it's kind of my way of also kind of fixing the problem that I've had with Cthulhu. Like, if you needed to die, and the only way to die was to let these guys come in, and they're also going to kill everybody else, but you get what you want, which is death. Like, that made sense to me. So now he's in a position where, what do you do? Do you sacrifice eternal suffering to save humanity? Or do you just go ahead and screw humanity? What have they ever done for you? And get your peace. Now, originally, that wasn't the exact story. And so it's a lot more heroic now than it was, because trying to write it, like one of the original scenes, because I was thinking about, like, what can I do to really show how bad this guy is? So it wasn't a marshal at first. It was actually the bad guy that's in the story was going to be my protagonist. And this kid comes up to him because, in my original draft, he was kind of like this penny novel hero. So back in the day, people would write stories about real villains, and they would kind of romanticize them on the East Coast, and they would become famous, and they didn't even know it because they couldn't read anyway. So they had no idea that they were in these stories. And so in the opening scene, he's walking down the street, and this little 8-year-old kid comes up, and it's like, oh my God, you're so-and-so. You're so amazing. You're my favorite, and he's got the book, and the guy shoots him in the head and keeps walking. And that was just my way to show you how horrible this character was. But I ended up I couldn't. I'm not that type of writer. So I don't know. It's outside of my purview if you're talking about how to write a really terrible character. And
no, not terrible character. Because, okay, so here's what, like, in the dynamic story creation, which is when the first time I really started to engage with this subject anyway, you were talking about the original Star Wars. Let's go back to Star Wars, everybody's favorite movie to discuss. You were saying that we've got comedies and tragedies, which use happy ending story and tragedy, because people associate comedy with haha today. But so happy endings and tragedies.
I totally missed what you're saying, but I think I got, but keep going. I think
Okay.
I'm sorry. I literally completely misunderstood you.
Okay, so yeah, to start this off then, that you were saying in the dynamic story creation that if you've got a story like Star Wars and you're trying to tell a story about faith versus technology, which one are you going to choose? Which one's better? You're supposed to choose which one is best for which one is the correct answer for your story. And in Star Wars, which is told as a happy ending story, Luke makes the right choice and then is successful. He turns off his targeting computer. He trusts in the Force. He blows up the Death Star. But you say that you could tell this story as a tragedy. So I'll let you pick up from there.
All right. So this is actually not as complicated as I've thought you were going with.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're following the hero's journey, you've got two ways to do it. You got a tragedy ending, and then you've got the feel-good ending. And really the only difference between the two is if the character gets what they want, you're writing a tragedy. If they get what they need, then you're writing a feel-good story, which means if they literally do not get what they want, it's a feel-good story. And so what I mean by that is when you're writing a story that has your theme in it and you understand thematic elements and how to deal with it, there's two sides to that theme. There's the one side that you're trying to prove, and there's the one side that is the opposite of that. So like if we look at Lord of the Flies again, we have all humans are born evil and all humans are born good. We're going to bounce back and forth between those two until we finally prove one of them as true in this story. In Star Wars, you're right. We have, should you rely on faith to save you, or should you rely on technology to save you? And so we're going to bounce back and forth between those two. We have Obi-Wan Kenobi saying, hey, you need to believe in the Force. The Force is the only thing going to save you. And then we have this really cool Han Solo character. It's like, dude, Hoku religions, nothing beats a blaster at your side, kid. Nothing. Like, technology is it. And Obi-Wan's like, no, faith is it. But the cool thing about Star Wars is they actually have that on the bad guy side too. We have Darth Vader going, no, it's all about faith. And we have the Empire going, no, Death Star, we can blow up planets. It's all about technology. So he did a really good job of showing the thematic, the elements of the theme on both the good side and the bad side. And a story at its core is just your character moving from the wrong side of the theme to the right side of the theme. So like one of the things I say is the reason why you can't write a story without understanding what your theme is because if you're writing a story that is theme based, the character has to start on the wrong side. They have to be against what you're doing. So that's why the story starts with Ralph in Lord of the Flies. All humans are born good. He's on the wrong side. He has to learn that all humans are actually born evil. If we look at V for Vendetta, Vi starts on the side of, no. We don't need freedom. We need safety. And that's why V drags her through the gutter to show her the importance of freedom. When we look at Star Wars, Luke Skywalker starts on the side of technology. He starts so far on the side of technology, he's never even heard of faith. He doesn't know. And we're saying faith just so everybody can catch up or I don't lose anybody. The reason why the Force works so great in A New Hope and like fails in all the other Star Wars is because in the first one, it was an allegory. It wasn't real. It was faith. It was religion. It was believing in something greater than yourself. That's why Obi-Wan Kenobi describes it as, it surrounds you. It penetrates you. It's in you. It's on, it's everywhere because it's religion. But you're not going to have a sci-fi movie that's going to, like, let's say Obi-Wan was actually a cleric, preaching Christianity and Christianity is going to blow up the Death Star. That's not going to work. We need, it's sci-fi and fantasy. We need to do something a little more. So that's what the Force was. So that's why I keep saying religion. Is religion going to save you? Is faith going to save you? Or is technology going to save you? And then we bounce back and forth there. So Luke Skywalker starts on the wrong side. He only knows technology. He knows blasters and
Skyhopper, speeder, and Skyhopper.
Right, speeders and lightsabers and all this stuff. But at the end, and here's why that this is the theme. Because a lot of people don't even realize that the theme has to do with faith. But the overcome, and this is an internal story arc. So the question is raging inside of Luke. So Lord of the Flies, it's raging in the world. V for Vendetta, it's raging in the world. But in Star Wars, it's an internal story arc. So the character is the one who has to decide. At the end, when he's going to do the overcome, he's asked, all right, Luke, do you want to use technology to save you? Or do you want to use faith to save you? It's your choice. We've shown you both sides. Which do you pick? And he chooses faith. Turns off the targeting computer, blows up the Death Star. Everybody jumps up and claps. Yay, the Force. Because we all innately crave to believe in something bigger than ourselves. If we want to do the same thing, as a tragedy, Luke picks the computer, misses, and dies. And the Empire rules the world. But the audience gets it. The audience is still like, dude, why didn't you pick faith? Like, it was right there. So if we look at some classic tragedies, like King Midas. King Midas, what does he want? He wants gold. But he's King Midas. He's not homeless guy Midas. He's King Midas. So what are we playing with in the theme there? Some people think it's greed. And that's the thing about themes is you can't actually say them in your story or your preaching. And no one likes to be preached to. I think the theme is actually being satisfied with what you have. That's what I took out of it. But again, it's subjective. So it's not that I'm right and other people are wrong. It's whatever you got out of the story. So King Midas wants more gold. What does he get? He gets more gold. But he kills his daughter and he can't eat. And he suffers. And we all know, dude, you had this loving family and you were king and you were loved by everybody. Why didn't you just be happy with that? So it's a tragedy. Same thing with the Pied Piper. What do the villagers want? They want to get rid of the rats, but they also want to keep all their money. So what do? They get rid of the rats because the Pied Piper does it, and then they just don't pay the Pied Piper. What happens? The Pied Piper kills all of their children. And I'm talking about the original version. I don't like the frou-frou American version where they're like, the Pied Piper's like, I'm going to kill your kids. And like, oh, no, here's the money. Like, no. In the original version, he literally drowns all of their children and then leaves. And that is the lesson. Don't be greedy. If you promise that you're going to do something, do it. I mean, that's the theme that we're playing with in there. And so those are tragedies, but we get it. We still get that the villagers were stupid. They said they were going to pay the guy if he did the job. He did the job. What do you expect? You didn't pay him, so your kids die. You suffer. And so that's what I mean by that. Look at Finding Nemo. And there's 2 stories in Finding Nemo. Technically, there's 3, but I'm not going to talk about that. There's 2 stories in Finding Nemo. We have the Marlin story arc, which is the daddy fish, and we have the Nemo story arc, which is the little fish. The Nemo story arc, I'm not going to talk about. It's a coming of age story. We can talk about it if you want, but it is what it is. I'm more interested. I really think that the Marlin story arc, and it also was the majority of the movie anyway, but the Marlin story arc is the thematic elements we're playing with is what type of parent should you be? Should you be an overprotective parent that literally doesn't let your kid ever have any danger whatsoever? Or should you be a parent that understands that you have to let your kid have some danger in life, but make sure that you're there, that you make sure he doesn't die? But eventually he's going to grow up and he's going to go out in the real world and you're not going to be able to protect him. So that's the thematic element we're playing with, is what type of parent should you be? Where does he start? He starts on the wrong side, because we're going to prove that you don't need to be an overprotective parent. So he starts as a completely overprotective parent, but we get it. And that's where that third story comes in. The funny thing is most people don't realize there's an entire hero's journey arc in the first 90 seconds of that movie. Most of it is off screen, but it's an entire story, start to finish, act 1, act 2, and act 3 in the first 90 seconds. And it's a very different character in that story, because when we meet Marlin, he's as masculine as you can get. What's his Coral isn't it Coral, the name of the fish that his wife?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is.
So he's like, look, baby, I got you the perfect house. You married me. You said, I told you I'd get you the first house. Look at that view. It's perfect school district. You wanted that. Look, I got you the perfect number of kids, 400. I don't know why it's perfect number of kids, but I got it for you. I'm the man. I did everything. And then to show how little he cares about parenting, she says, well, we're not done. We have to name the kids. And he's like, that's easy. Those 200 are named Marlin. Those 200 are named Coral. We're done. I mean, it's such a dude thing to do. But then he watches his wife and 399 children get eaten in front of him. And then we fade to black. We still have the rest of the story. We still go through the grieving process and everything. We get that all off screen. We don't need it. We as humans can relate to that story, because now when we meet him, he's got 1 child and he's like, you know what? You don't even need to go to school. Just stay home. We'll just play in your room with pillows. Like, you don't need anything. And we're like, yeah. I mean, I am the type of parent, literally, like when my baby was crawling toward an electrical outlet, my wife was all freaking out. I'm like, let him go. It won't kill him and he'll never do it again. Like, it's fine. Because that's the type of dad I was. I was like, if it's not going to kill him, I'm going to let him experience it. I don't, whatever. Because I've only stuck my finger in a light socket once. I was about 4 and I've never done it since then. It was a great learning lesson for me. So me, a parent that hates overprotective parents, the reason why that opening story is so powerful is I am now as overprotective as you can be with that little Nemo fish. I'm like, yeah, no, he doesn't need to go anywhere. You do everything in your power to keep him away from all danger. So that first story buys my loyalty into believing that we need to protect this fish at all costs. That's why it's so brilliantly written. But now we get into the actual story. Marlin starts on the wrong side of the theme. He's overprotective. He has to start on the wrong side of the theme because the overcome is him moving to the right side of the theme. But here's another thing that a lot of people don't realize. The inciting incident has to happen because the character's on the wrong side of the theme. And that is very, very, very difficult. That's actually one of the most difficult part of stories to me, is to come up with, how does the inciting incident happen because the character's on the wrong side? So Nemo gets kidnapped. But he doesn't get kidnapped because he's a jerk kid, because that would be a different story. Remember, he's sitting out on the edge of the coral and his friends are looking at the boat. They call it the butt. And they're like, oh, go touch the butt. We're not telling a story about a rebellious child. So what does Nemo say? No, my dad would not be happy if I did that. No, I'm not going to do that. That would be wrong. But then what happens? Marlin shows up and he screams at his kid. Don't you dare do that. You're bad. Don't you? And Nemo's like, oh, right. You're on the wrong side of the theme. I now have to go get kidnapped so that you learn a lesson. And he gets kidnapped. But he wouldn't have gone out there had Marlin not been on the wrong side of the theme. That's why Marlin has to scream at him, because the audience has to, again, you can never mention your theme. You have to show it, and you have to do it organically. And so with Marlin screaming at Nemo, and it's the first time he screams at Nemo, and Nemo then going against him and touching the button, getting kidnapped, that causes the inciting incident. That's hard. But at the end, we get all the way to the end. The funny thing about Finding Nemo to me is he doesn't find Nemo. Marlin gets to the city and goes, oh, right, I'm a fish. I can't go in there. But he can't save Nemo, because Nemo's story is a coming of age story. And that deals with the themes of growing up, doing things without your parents for the first time. He has to save himself. That's why so many coming of age stories are either orphans, Harry Potter and every other story, Star Wars, or they have one parent, because the parent cannot help the child in a coming of age story, because that defeats the purpose. So Nemo has to rescue himself. He has to, or his story doesn't work. So Marlin gets there to the end, and he's like, right, I can't do this. And then Nemo just comes swimming up. Hey, Dad, I rescued myself. Let's go home. That's the end of Nemo's story. Marlin hasn't done his overcome yet. Marlin hasn't been presented with which type of parent are you going to be? You've gone on this journey. You've seen all this stuff about why your kid not kidnapped is because of your fault, because of the type of parent you were. So now what are you going to do? Which is why Dory has to get captured by the net at the end. And Nemo says, Dad, the stuff that I learned in there, I can save her. And then the story asks Marlin, all right, Marlin, you barely know this crazy woman. You can just let her die. It's fine. You can take your kid, go home, let her die, continue to be an overprotective parent, learn nothing from this story. But Dory dies. Or you can understand that you haven't been the right type of parent. The net is huge. You know it's not going to hurt, your little Nemo fish. He's going to go in and get out. So even if he can't save Dory, he's still relatively safe. What are you going to do? You're going to be an overprotective parent and let Dory die? Or are you going to trust that your child can actually do some things? And he moves to the right side of the theme. He lets Nemo go and save Dory. So that's what I mean. If he had taken Nemo, then we would have ramped up the death of Dory. We would have made that very tragic. Maybe even Marlin may have something bad happen. Maybe because he doesn't let Nemo go, something comes around and kills Nemo. And then it's a tragedy. But we know, man, if you had just trusted your child, if you had just stopped being this overprotective parent, you wouldn't have lost your child and your friend. So that's what I mean by that. It's all revolves around the theme. All of it. Which is, again, why if you don't know what your theme is, you don't have a story. In my opinion. Again, you can be Michael Bay. He makes way more money than I do. So, if you have
the option to be you or Michael Bay, pick Michael.
Right, exactly. You'd be a starving writer that literally has a company named Starving Writer Studio that isn't ironic at all. Or you can be Michael Bay and have some starving writer, talk bad about you.
But my question would be, with regard to something like Star Wars, if you said, all right, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do Star Wars as a tragedy, and I'm not going to have Luke turn off the targeting computer, would people accept that? If you told the rest of the Star Wars the exact way that it is, and then you just change that one thing at the end, do you end up with something that the audience accepts?
Maybe
not.
So tragedies are hard. One of the most famous tragic writers is Shakespeare. His first tragedy is horrible. Titus Andronicus, or Andronicus Titus. I always get it confused. It's terrible. It's just an awful story, at least to me. It was one of the few Shakespeares that I just hated. It takes a lot to write a tragedy. I don't write tragedies. I write tragic, heroic stories because there's a lot of death and a lot of pain and a lot of misery in what I write, because I do like tragedy for some reason. But at the end, there will always be a satisfying ending. The good guys are always going to win in my stories. I do not write tragedies. One, because I don't want to tell those stories. I have no interest. But two, I don't know if I could. I mean, writing a tragedy, like writing something like Seven. Seven's a tragedy. it's amazing. And you get it. You get the depth of depravity of humanity. You understand what you're supposed to understand from that movie. But it doesn't end well. Although it did give us Brad Pitt going, "What's in the box?" which is an awesome, iconic line. So tragedies are hard. That's the thing about tragedies. And if you're starting off in your writing career and you're like, "I'm going to write a tragedy," then I just don't recommend that. Like, why would you start off trying to tackle one of the hardest aspects of writing that exists? So that's my point with it. Tragedies are hard to make it, not to write it. Anybody can write it. To make it actually impactful to the audience is where the difficult part comes in. So, King Midas has lasted for however long it's lasted because it's impactful. The Pied Piper, same way. Seven, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet. We can go through some of the tragic stories that have lasted for eons, but they work. And so can you actually pull that off? That's the question.
So I will say Phaser Wrist does say, LOL, I have a feeling that me and Drake would get along rather well. Yes, I have a feeling so. And I want to say, this is the connection that is being made here on Table Talk, because I was first introduced to this idea with the dynamic story about what it takes to write a tragedy. But I think that also Adrian has expanded on what you would actually have to do in Star Wars if you wanted to be a tragic ending. And so maybe, who knows, maybe one day this is a conversation that I could actually get the two of you together on or something. But or if you're on Table Talk, if you're watching, Adrian's been on the show before and we talked about tragic characters. So look that up, because just like I was like, wow, oh my God, when I read this one, I also read this one. It's like, oh my God, that he lays out. I think, not to put words in your mouth, Phaser Wrist, but I think that you would say no, that it would not work if only that thing in Star Wars was flipped. And he's got a theory as to what to do. So that's really so.
Yeah, I mean, you have to set it up. You can't just use a story that was going to a happy ending and just change the ending. No. If that was what you were asking me, I didn't realize that what you were asking me. If that's what you're asking me, absolutely not. That would never work.
Okay, that does not work. So you can't.
No, because stories are not an ending. They're a whole. Everything matters. How we introduce the everyman character, how we actually connect the character to the reader, how we build the world, all the emotions that we're dealing with, not just your major theme, but all of your minor themes that you're dealing with. Because every scene, you're not just going to have one major theme. You're going to have minor themes that enter at different times in the story and then leave. And no, there's not a minor theme list and a major theme list. There's just a theme list. It's how you use them. A major theme starts at the beginning, goes all the way through. Minor themes come and go as they need, but the minor themes always need to complement the major theme. As an example, since I've been hammering on Finding Nemo because it's so brilliantly written, why didn't Marlin hook up with Dory? Why wasn't there a love romance in that story? She's single. He's a widower. Why not a romance? Because romance is set in hope. That's its base. It's hope, hope for the future and everything else. Every single theme they play with in Finding Nemo is based in fear. The fear of what type of parent to be, the fear of being without your parents for the first time, the fear of being eaten by sharks, the fear of, having a child kidnapped, the fear of having your wife killed and, losing children. Every single theme they play with is based in fear, which is what you have to think about. Everything needs to feed into everything so that the reader, because here's the thing. Like I said, you can't mention the theme. So if I write a story that has 5 chapters, and in chapter 1, the theme is A, and chapter 2, the theme is B, and in chapter 3, the theme is question mark, and in chapter 4, the theme is asterisk, and in chapter 5, the theme is T. What's the theme of the story? But if I write a story where in the first chapter the theme is A, in the second chapter it's A, in the third it's A, in the fourth it's A, and the fifth is A, what's the theme of the book?
A.
But you can't say A, but you have to thread it through every one of them. So one of the things I've tried to do in my career is change over the last 20, 30 years. Game of Thrones really is in my opinion, the culprit of this. But people have lost what the meaning of kill your darlings is. I go to writers groups, I go to writers conferences, and I've tried to kill this for 20 years. Killing your darlings has nothing to do with your characters. It's not about killing characters. Back in the day, before fantasy, there's only one epic fantasy writer that's a pantser. He will never finish his series because he's never finished anything. Now, he's made more money than me, so you can guess who I'm talking about. Every other epic fantasy writer is a plotter, because these are very complicated, very dynamic, very convoluted stories that we're telling. You just can't make up on the fly. However, before epic fantasy, you were taught that you shouldn't plot. That's why Stephen King says that in On Writing, because he's from that old school. You must be a pantser. You must allow your muse to come through just the flow of consciousness and write this story. Otherwise, you're not a real writer. So forever, people wrote stories that way. They didn't plot. They experienced them. The problem is that when you do that, you've got tons of chapters that have other themes because you don't know what your theme is yet. You haven't figured out your story. So when you figure out your story, usually after you finish your first draft, now you know what your theme is. Now you know how you're going to end the story. Well, now you have to go back and you have to go through every chapter, every scene, and go, okay, now I know my theme. Does this scene move this theme or not? Yes. Okay, great. It's good. This scene, no, it doesn't. Now you have to decide, okay, can I rewrite it so that the theme is in it? Or do I need to cut it? And that's what killing your darlings means. It means cutting a chapter that you wrote because you love it, but you got to cut it because it doesn't move the theme. And the theme is the story. Without the theme, there is no story. So that's what killing your darlings meant. It meant being willing to chop chapters because it doesn't, now that you figured out your theme. As a plotter, I already figured out my theme before I start writing. Every single chapter that I have plotted out makes it to the published book because I figure it all out ahead of time. That's what I am. I'm a plotter. So that is, I don't remember, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But all of this stuff comes into play. Yeah, I derailed myself. It's been a long day for me. Sorry.
I remember where well, let me just, I've got other things. We should have another conversation, so I'll have you back. But on this subject, when we're talking about the theme and things like this was also one of the most, actually, let me just say then, I just want to connect with that tragedy thing, that when I was reading that, because right, your dynamic story creation does not really deal a whole lot with tragedy.
No,
it mentions it, but
it's not my wheelhouse.
Right. So I'm just saying that I would start with the dynamic story creation, but then if you have some realizations about tragedy in there, and if you want more on actually the structure of what would make Luke Skywalker maintaining the targeting computer on.
Oh, you just put me back on the track.
Okay, that's it. I would go to Stomping Kittens. Go ahead.
Yeah, and by the way, I've already put Stomping Kittens in my shopping cart, so that'll be my next nonfiction book that I read. I'm excited to read that. The story's a whole. Everything matters. Everything goes together. That's why I went through the whole dissertation about all the themes and minor themes and everything like that. Everything has to feed in together. If you've built a story from start to finish to be a happy ending, and all you do is just have him not have the happy ending, no, because you didn't have the building blocks. Everything builds to where you're going. And if it doesn't, it's broken. And that's why sometimes you'll read a story or you'll watch a movie where you're like, you know what? I mean, the characters were okay. The world was okay. The story was okay. But I don't know. I didn't like it. A lot of times that's because they screwed up the theme. They just broke. They didn't understand it's a holistic thing. Stories are not a moment here and a moment there and a moment here. It's a holistic thing. And especially like the way I write epic fantasy, like one of the things that I'm proud of myself on Farmers and Mercenaries is it's technically 4 novellas. They never touch, and yet no one notices. No one has ever come up to me and said, you know, you just wrote 4 novellas. And one of the reasons I believe is because when I was plotting it out, even though all 4 of them are on different continents, they all have this, they all rise at the same time and fall at the same time as you go through the stories. They're not, you don't notice it, But as one story is picking up, all of them are picking up, or as one thing's hitting a wall, they're all hitting some type of wall. And so they feel like you're reading one story. And technically they don't actually connect until the second book. None of the characters are together until book 2. And no one ever noticed, not a single person, because it's a holistic thing the way I write stories. It's not about, these 4 POV characters doing their own thing. I'm writing one story. I'm just telling it through 4 POVs, which means each one of them have their own thematic element. The story has a thematic element as well. So there's 5 themes in book 1. Technically there's 6 because the 5 arcs, it's a 5 novel series. So there has to be a theme that threads through the whole saga. So there's 6 themes, main themes that I'm playing with in, major themes that I'm playing with in book 1. The four characters have one, the book has one, and then I start the major theme for the saga. But no one notices that they're just reading 4 completely unconnected stories. Because again, I wrote it as one story. So you get things in one character story that you need for another character story emotionally, not information about the world or anything, because I do that as well. Each character also has, like, the farm boy doesn't know anything about certain things, so he asks a lot of questions, which I do a lot of world building in his chapter. Obviously the jaded mercenary that's been around forever, I'm not going to do much world building in his chapter. He already knows pretty much everything. But the 17-year-old kid that's just leaving the farm for the first time, he don't know nothing. So, a lot of world building in that chapter, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the emotional, because why does the hero's journey work so well? Why is 80% of all stories today told on the hero's journey? The hero's journey works, and this is what Joseph Campbell really his genius was, and what he truly figured out. The reason why the hero's journey structure can be found in every story that resonates through time is because it's not that you have to do the everyman first, and then you have to do this, and you have to do that. This is when the reader needs that piece of emotion. And you can mix it up. So, like, as an example, one of the things in the hero's journey is the atonement of the father. It's where the character comes into face to face with the ultimate thing that they're going to be dealing with, the ultimate evil, whatever. In Star Wars, it happens at the beginning of Act 2, which is where the hero's journey kind of puts it. And it's when Obi-Wan Kenobi gets killed. Luke Skywalker gets to see that for the first time, and everything changes. That's when he knows that this is a serious thing that he's on. He's not just out playing with, floating balls that shoot stingers at him. People are going to die. And so that's the atonement of the father there. In Finding Nemo, it happens at the end of Act 2, which is somewhere that it doesn't normally happen. And the atonement of the father moment in Finding Nemo for the Marlin story arc is the stoned turtle.
Oh.
Because that's where we need to see a parent that isn't overprotective. If we had saw the stoned turtle at the beginning of Act 2, wouldn't have had an impact on us. We see him at the end of Act 2 where he's like, dude, that's not how you parent. You got to parent like this. We're not ready for that as an audience until that moment. So here's something I also say all the time. I guess I should say it here. Nothing you do in a story is real. Your characters aren't real. Your world isn't real. Your plot isn't real. None of it's real. There's one thing that's real. One, the reader. That's it. Every word you write, every situation you go through is not for your characters. It's for the reader. Period. End of discussion. You don't need to write a scene where a character learns something, because the character's not stinking real. They don't learn anything. The scene is there to teach the reader something. They're the only thing that matters. So if you really want to impact your reader, they're the only thing that matters to you. They're the only thing you focus on. Everything you do, and that's why the story to me is holistic. It's all there. It's what does the reader need to feel at this moment so that at the end they are impacted by this journey. So go back to my Bard's Oath. That's what I mean by that. It's about moving the reader so that they become a better human being at the end of the story, the journey. That's it. Nothing else is real. That's why when people are like, oh, who's your favorite character? I'm like, it's a freaking screwdriver. They're just a tool. What do you mean, which is my favorite? I mean, I like my characters, but the characters are there for the reader. They're there to make the reader feel something. That's it. They're not real. They're a hammer or a screwdriver. They're just tools that I use to make the reader feel something. And obviously it works because I run a very high, review, and I have a very high hook rate in my fans. If I can get somebody to read me that likes fantasy, they're pretty much going to read me for the rest of my life. So, and it's because they're the only thing that matters to me as a storyteller. The story doesn't matter. They matter. The story is there to make them feel something. The story is there to move them.
And that's interesting. I was just thinking that over the past week that the next story that I try to do needs to be for one of my nephews. I got a certain nephew in mind. It's like, I think the next one thing I try to write is just going to be to him. Like, for the White Runners too, but I need to write it as I'm writing it. I want him to have a story, and what does that need to be? All right, let me ask you, if you got time for one further question. I want to ask you about this and let you articulate this, because we got the writer, the writer's room and things like that. I'll bring up here in just a moment that people want to get it. I know people are watching this and want to get in on. Let me go ahead and post the writers, the 50% off writers link. So you want to talk with Drake and be part of the writers group?
If you want to work with me on a weekly basis and be in an environment that is controlled by me, that is set up with a culture, that's the big thing I talk about a lot in the writers room, is the culture. It's about understanding the best way to both be a critiquer for others, because there's only one way to grow as a writer. There is no other way. Yes, books are great, classes are great, stuff like this, conversations are great, but there is only one way to get better as a writer. You must do two things. You must be critiqued, and you must critique others. Like, it kills me when I meet somebody and they're like, oh, I don't want to be in a writer's group because I don't want to help somebody else become a better writer. Why would I do that? Because it makes you a better writer. Like, you can't become a better writer unless you're critiquing others. Why do I've been running writers group for 20 years. Why? I don't bring anything to my writers group. I don't read in my writers groups because I need to critique others to become better. I have 100 beta readers. My beta reader team is insanely large. So I have 100 beta readers. They're the ones that are critiquing me. Plus I have an alpha reader team as well. That's where I get my critiques from. But I need to critique others. And so that's why I run my writers groups, is to critique other people, because it makes me a better writer. But there has to be a culture to it. And that's what I basically maintain. Yes, you get my knowledge and you get, me doing classes and everything like that. But what you really get is the fact that everyone else in there is having the same culture, and they're all there for the same reasons, and they're all driven by the same purpose. And so that's what the writer's room is in a nutshell. And that's why I think there's no better place on this planet to become a better writer than my writer's room.
All right. So, okay. So everybody go there. But here, so I'm going to ask you to explain your theory of the physical and the immaterial layers of the story. Because when I was reading, this is one of the first major things that I was reading. They went, oh my God, this is incredible. I've never read this before. Because in dynamic story creation, you have a theory of a physical layer of the story and an invisible layer of the story, and how these two things interact, which I had never read before. Will you give everybody a summary of what this is and what this means in your story?
Can I brag on myself just a little bit?
Sure.
Because there's actually one thing. So, full disclosure, I'm actually dyslexic. I have never been to college except for the colleges that pay me to come teach there. And I have a remedial 9th grade English education. Like, if there is anybody that should not only be a professional writer, but teach writing, it's me. And if you had told a 14-year-old Drake that he would grow up to be a writer, he would have kicked you. And if you said you were going to teach writing all over the world, he would spit on you after he kicked you. Like, I hated this stuff growing up because I was dyslexic and I didn't understand it. I sent the manuscript to a college professor friend of mine who teaches the MFA course at a large prestigious.
The dynamic story creation manuscript?
Yeah, the dynamic story creation. And, in the beginning, I talk about how we've been telling stories on paper for about 7,000, 8,000 years. That's the oldest, tablet fiction story that we have. And he said, you're right. That's it. And here's the most amazing thing about dynamic story creation to him. And again, I'm bragging a little bit, but this is his words. this industry is 10,000 years old. And I counted 7 theories in this book that have never been created before. Theories on writing. And like, I don't, like, it is weird to me that some uneducated just hick from Louisiana can do something in an industry that's this old and this set in its ways. But yeah, so the invisible layer versus the physical layer is one of those unique theories of mine. All of my theories are not me sitting around like a college professor, waxing all philosophical. These are how
Let me handle that.
Well, this is how I teach my broken brain how to tell stories. So when I'm learning, like, it's so funny to me that people love how I teach, because I'm just like, I'm just teaching you the broken brain way to do this. Because I get all these people that are like, oh my God, I went to 4 years of creative writing school and I learned more in your 1 hour class than I learned in the entire 4 years there. I'm like, yeah, I just taught you like a word that we're not allowed to say anymore. The R word, the broken brain word. I'm like, because that's how I had to learn it. My brain's broken. So these theories were not for you. I didn't mean to get them out to the world. They were for me. And so when I'm looking at themes and I'm looking at, because when you go to an MFA class, they will teach you about themes. And I'll save you $150,000 because this is the entire thing that they do. They say you must have a theme in your story. If you don't have a theme, you don't have a story, which I agree with. They say you can never mention your theme. If you mention your theme, you're preaching and the readers won't like it, which I agree with. And then they say, good luck. That's it. That's how they teach themes. That didn't work for me. I'm not smart enough or lucky enough to figure that out. So when I actually sat down and really started looking at what makes a story work and what makes a story not work, because I also love looking at stuff that's broken and trying to figure out why it's broken and how it could be fixed, I realized that everything that you read or watch on screen is the physical layer. And again, that's all this stuff that isn't real. The characters, the conflict, the lightsabers, the Death Stars blown up, the Kung Fu room and all of that. All of that is there solely to deliver the theme, which we're not allowed to say. So I saw that as an invisible layer. So the invisible layer is the actual story that you're telling, the actual thing that is going to move the audience. The physical layer is just the UPS truck. It's just the delivery vehicle that delivers the invisible layer. And so that's how I came up with that theory. I mean, it was just me trying to figure out how this works and how am I going to use it as a professional. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I kind of floundered, and I did do a bunch of different jobs. I owned a computer company for a while. But I wrote my first book when I was 12. It was horrible. It was written by a 12-year-old dyslexic child. No one will ever read it. But I've always been a storyteller. So when I got out of the Corps and got into business and for my hobby, I was like, I'm smart enough. I should be able to figure this stuff out. Like, I couldn't in school because a dyslexic person. And so one of the first things I did was learn what dyslexia was and how my brain actually worked, because it's different. Like, in a nutshell, it's kind of interesting. This is a kind of a side job, but it won't take me a second. Dyslexics only see things in 3 dimensions. The reason why we write words backwards or letters backwards is because I see them from all sides simultaneously. There is no front to me, which is why words are very difficult for us, because they're 2-dimensional things that we see in 3 dimensions. But it's also why I think that dyslexics make the best storytellers, because we see everything in 3 dimensions all the time. I've never seen a word in my head. I've never seen a sentence in my head. That's why I can only listen. Now that I'm at the level that I'm at with editing and everything, I cannot read books. I can't even read like Brandon Sanderson, because I will just pick it apart and it will ruin the story for me. But I can listen to the audiobook because I can't see the words. So I'm fine listening to audiobooks because all I see is the movie now. I don't actually see how it's written. So I cannot read a book without destroying it. Just where it is. So just interesting how dyslexic work. And so I did a lot of research on that. And then once I got that down and like, oh, okay, so this is how my brain works. I can't learn the way you were teaching it. That's all it was. So now since no one else is teaching dyslexic how to write, let me create a course on how to teach dyslexics how to write, which was me. And I wasn't really creating an official course. I was just trying to figure it out myself. And that's it. That's where all those theories came from.
Well, so can you articulate a little bit using Star Wars as an example what you're talking about with regard to the physical layer and the invisible layer, and what the interplay is, and why that one is so fantastic? An example.
So the physical layer is everything that's in the movie. So it's, the droids and Luke Skywalker and, sand people and everything else. The invisible layer is the theme. It's what we can never mention. That's why the reason why I think it's so well done is because usually when I tell somebody that's watched it a million times and I tell them, oh yeah, no, it's about, should you believe in faith or technology? They're like, what? There's no faith in that movie. What are you even talking about? So every scene is on the invisible side is bouncing between the two sides of the theme. So one of the reasons why another theory in that book that I created was everyone teaches themes as a question. They say, oh, it's a question, which should you trust, faith or technology? That didn't work for me. To me, that's for the audience. The question is for them. What I need two statements. So if I was writing Star Wars, the theme that I would play with on my side would be only technology will save you. Only faith will save you. And then in each scene that I'm creating, one of those two would be proven true. And so on the visible layer, you ask, what is the scene doing? So like I said, in the scene where he's fighting the little laser ball thing and he's got the blindfold on and he fails miserably and he gets zapped several times. We have faith. Dude, faith is all you can do. Faith is what's going to save you. But he fails, and then Han Solo says that beautiful iconic line of nothing beats a good blaster at your hip, kid. Like hokey religions, that's never going to do it. That scene proves technology is the only thing that's going to save you, kid. That's it. So that's what I mean by that. What you have to understand on the invisible side is, what is the scene actually proving? What is it actually doing for the audience? What's it making them feel? And what is it making them struggle with? That question. So that when we get to the end and the character has to make that decision, or the world has to make that decision, if we're using an external story arc, it matters to the audience. They don't notice it. That's why I call it the invisible layer, or I also teach it as a reader's unknown expectations. That's what the invisible layer fulfills. It fulfills the reader's unknown expectations. They have no idea. Fans only know whether they like a movie or not. That's it. That's their responsibility. Give me $12, like it, give me 5-star, hate it, give me 1 star. That's your job. And that's it. But as a professional story creator, I need way more than that, especially if I want to get that 5-star review. And so that's what I mean by that. Does that answer your question? Does that get you?
Yeah, it does. So like you talk about also that, okay, you've got the Empire versus the Rebellion fighting on this physical layer, but then also in Star Wars you put sometimes the Empire is going to be up and sometimes the heroes are going to be up. The Rebellion's going to be up, and that's the physical layer oscillating back and forth that you're going to remember.
That's called reversals.
Reversals, right? Reversals on the physical layer. That's what you're seeing on the. But then you say that you also have this debate between faith and technology that's going on. And crucially, in this case, they put advocates of both faith and technology on both sides of the physical layer. So Darth Vader, on the good side, easily, you've got Han Solo, who's advocating for technology. You've got Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's advocating for faith. And Luke is trying to decide in the middle here. And he's hearing these characters who are advocating. But then also on the bad guy's side, you put Darth Vader, who's advocating for faith, and you put Grand Moff Tarkin, who's advocating for technology. So not only are you doing up and down physical layer back and forth, but you're oscillating with back and forth faith and technology. Sometimes the bad guys are up, and sometimes they're up because of faith, and sometimes they're up because of technology. Sometimes the good guys are up because of faith. Sometimes the good guys are up because of technology. And you've got this incredible dance throughout the whole movie.
And I actually think that is the reason why Star Wars has been such an impact on people. Because normally you only do that on one side. Like to come up with that matrix, and that's what I call it, the story matrix of it. To come up with a matrix where you have the theme warring both on the hero side and on the villain side, there's not many people that have ever pulled that off. And it is why. So what does this do? And again, this is all about the reader. It has nothing to do with the story. What does this do for the reader? It means that you're off balance. You're never quite sure which way we're going to go. Because now we have, like you said, we have the bad guys using faith to win, but we got the good guys using faith to win. But we got the bad guys using technology to win, but we got the good guys using technology. What's going on? And I think that's why it has such an impact on audiences, is because you really do struggle through that whole. And again, it's unknown. You're not actually thinking about this stuff. That's what, and especially with Star Wars, that's why most people, when I say that again, never even realize that they're actually trying to decide between faith and a greater power and technology. But what was relevant in the 70s? That's the other thing is that stories will have more impact based on what is relevant. Yes, themes are eternal. However, society has things going on. You know, we live in a world right now that has things going on that weren't going on even 5-6 years ago. So as society changes, story creators need to write stories that are relevant, not just to the human equation, but to the time period equation as well. And if you do it right, it won't matter if society changes. The story will still impact, maybe not as much, but it'll still absolutely impact in the future as well.
You know, as you've been sitting here talking, and you brought the Marine, so you were in the Marine Corps? You brought up the Marine Corps. That, you know, Stephen Pressfield. I guess you've read Stephen Pressfield.
I have not.
Oh, you've not? He wrote one of my favorite books for the novels, which is The Gates of Fire, which we're going to talk about on this stream sometime. But it's about the Battle of Thermopylae and the Spartans.
Okay, so it's historical fiction.
Yeah, but he also wrote The War of Art, which is a nonfiction book about getting work done and being a writer. He wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
He was also in the Marine Corps. We've got a lot of people who seem like they were down in the trenches, who I really like. I mean, yourself included, I was never in the Marine Corps. I was never in the military. So I'm like, oh man, all the people who I seem to really like about their philosophies of story and the things they do had a completely different approach. Maybe that's my problem. Maybe I was never in the Marine Corps. I never did things like that. Maybe that's why
I got kicked in the teeth.
Working.
So I don't talk about my service much. I'm proud. It's great. I love the Marine Corps. I was in from 86 to 90. Those are the only 4 years that America was at war with no one. So yes, I would have gone to war. Yes, I was trained. Yes, I did all that stuff. But I mean, it's different from like the guys that served in Afghanistan or whatever. So I don't talk about it a lot because it was this weird, I got lucky in this weird little moment in American history that we just didn't fight anybody for 4 years. Literally a couple months after I got out is when the Iraq war happened. And so, because it happened in 90, 91, somewhere in there. It was right after I got out. So yeah, I don't talk about it a lot, but I mean, it still impacted me. I was young. It definitely had an impact on my life and how I see the world. And I'm very thankful that I went in, but.
Well, as my grandfather told me, Heath, if you don't join the military, you'll miss out on a completely different side of life. And I didn't. So I guess I missed out on that side of life. So, all right. So let's see. So you said go here. So this is the main place right here. So 50% off if you want to be part of the weekly meeting it's actually, let's see, right here, 50% off. This is the weekly writers meeting.
Well, it's actually, there's activities going on every day.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not, I mean, we only have about 50 members right now because I literally just launched it a couple months ago. We just did one thing of advertising last week. So we're just really getting into it. So right now you get a lot more time with me than you will in the future. My goal, yes, I will always be doing stuff. I have several activities that will always allow for people to interact with me. But, you know, when we get 200 members, 500 members, 1,000 members, I'm not going to be able to spend 100% of my time with every single member. So my goal is, yes, I will continue doing what I'm doing. So you'll always have me there every single week. And I'm, constantly doing things with everybody as a group. But my goal is to set up a culture that everyone in the room is also helping everyone in the room. That's the important part of a writer's group. And that's why it's called the writer's room. So like when you're in Hollywood and you're working in a writer's room, it is a very interesting culture that works really well, or at least it used to. Now they're breaking down because everyone hates everyone. But back in the day, you could have everyone have, completely different lives and lifestyles and opinions and religions, and the writer's room still worked. So that's the culture that I'm trying to develop in here, to make a really dynamic place for you to grow as a writer. But you have to help others. I mean, that's what I said. You have to critique others to become a better writer. So this gives you that place where everyone is there. They all know the same rules. Like I said, you have to go through a certification taught by me before you're allowed to join a critique group. And I teach you how to critique, and I teach you how to be critiqued. And so you also know that everyone else in the room knows exactly what is expected. So it takes a lot of the burden off. So if someone's in a critique group and they're not doing what they should, you can always just go, hey, remember Drake said you have to do it this way? Because I say in that critique group, the one way they'll get you kicked out of the writer's room is mess up my critique groups. They're the most important thing for a writer to grow. So if somebody comes in as a toxic and messes up one of my critique groups, they're out. That's another reason why I made it a paid private platform, because it weeds out the people that really should not be in things like this. And that, I think, is the biggest advantage to this.
All right. So that's most important right now, but also Starving Writer Studio. That's the main website. Because actually, so is that the best way to get in touch with you through that? Is there a contact through here?
Yeah. Here's the, if you go to the bottom, so the entire site I wrote, and one of the reasons why it's taken me a little time is everything is fantasy. Like even the receipts and the terms of service, like no one's ever going to read the terms of service, but I wrote it in fantasy speak. I've spent a lot of time on this website. So I call it the Bard's Missive, which is down there at the bottom. I do have a patron section that you get special things that are only available for members. Like one of the things I'm doing is I throw up 4 or 5 pieces of AI art, and I let the members vote on which one for me to write as a short story. And then I write it just for the members of that. Or at least they get it first. I don't know if I'll ever, maybe sell them later, but so like they picked this one here. If you scroll up just a little bit, that's the short story I'm writing right now for the.
This one right here. This is the exclusive story just for.
Yeah. So that's the one, the story they picked. If you click on there, you'll see the synopsis of it, because I don't even know the story until they pick the art. And then I figure out what the story is going to be and start writing it. So. Yeah.
Well, I was saying we're broadcasting on multiple. Good. Sorry.
I was going to say I'm doing a lot of stuff, and I do a private Q&A for them every month. So this is more fan based, less writer based, but we get to talk about whatever stories, my stuff. There's whatever we'll talk about, whatever, because it's just an open forum. But that's what that is.
All right, and we are broadcasting on multiple platforms, but mainly everybody's here on YouTube. So if you're here on YouTube, missed the link. This is where, if you're on YouTube, you can get Releasing Inner Dragon. That's where there's a lot more from you on a whole bunch of different subjects.
Yeah, we're over 100 episodes now. Me and Marie is another author. We've been doing this podcast for a little over 3 years. We haven't done any real advertising on it. I just brought on a marketing team to start working on this. Again, cancer throws a huge monkey wrench into everything. So I'm just getting back to being fairly healthy again. And so now I'm gearing up to really do my career again. But Releasing Your Inner Dragon is on all podcast platforms as well. So if you just search for Releasing Your Inner Dragon, it's available across the board. But if you want to watch us, you can do it on YouTube.
All right. Well, you're going to have to come back. I hope you will.
Absolutely.
This has been amazing. This has been amazing. And we didn't even get into, like next time we have you get back, we'll get into actual narrative and stuff like that, because I found this book also just as interesting. And the new one. Oh, yeah. We didn't even mention the new one is The Ultimate Guide to Show Don't Tell. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm a busy guy.
This one also has some unique theories in it to talk about.
We didn't really talk about the video games. We didn't talk about some other things that are going on. Like, there's all sorts of things that I've got my fingers in a lot of pies. I think the thing I'm most excited about that we didn't talk about at all. So my award-winning fantasy side, my first one, the one that we were talking about with the Farmers and Mercenaries, It has a tragic history. The publisher went out of business before it was finished releasing. And then I went with Sony and then had some health issues, and it's kind of just been sitting there in limbo, unfinished. Except for I'm not the same writer as I was back in, the early 2000s when I wrote that. So I don't want to finish the series when I'm not a huge fan of the writing. I mean, even though it won awards and the fans love it and all that, Sony loved it is the reason why they hired me. So I rewrote it from scratch. It went from 136,000 words to 230,000 words. So it almost doubled in size. I had an entire character arc to book 1 that should have been there, but I actually cut it because I was terrified to write a female perspective back then. Now I write romance as a female author with female protagonists, and no one knows that it's a male writing it. So I'm pretty good writing females now. But back then I was terrified. So I've included her in it now. And it's going to be an all-cast audiobook. We're going to production in February. There's some pretty big names that are, I'm doing the narration, but I've got tons of actors and other people that are doing all of the characters. And I am super excited about that.
Well, so we talked a lot from the writer's perspective, but if you're a fan, then if people want to know about that and want to be on top of everything that's coming out as a fan, which one of those is the best place to be a part of?
Writer Studio.
The Starving Writer
Studio. Matter of fact, the entire tragic history of my health issues and the Genesis Oblivion and its kind of path to being rewritten, everything is all, there's I wrote a giant, 7,000-8,000 word dissertation on just basically what's happened to me over the last decade, and kind of what to expect for me and where I'm going and everything like that.
All right. Well, thank you, Drake. Thank you, everyone who has been here in the comment section. This has been fantastic. I really enjoy all the comments. There was a lot that was going on. We weren't able to get to everybody, but I know you guys were also talking in the comments, and that was great. And then also to everybody who is going to watch on replay. Oh, I guess I should also say, hey, might as well say that come by and get to the Trial of St. Gabriel. One more time, I guess. If you enjoyed this, you want to see what I've written, and you want to engage with the Christmas story in a way that I've never seen a Christmas story dealt with before. So the the Trial of St. Gabriel, the dark story. I don't know what's going on. The dark story of the Bethlehem massacre in Christmas. We deal with the massacre of the innocents and what happens with Herod. Talking about confronting things that you wouldn't ordinarily confront in traditional Christmas stories. You don't typically read, like if you're just buying the happy story at Walmart, dealing with the Herod's massacre of the innocents. So that is on Kickstarter, and I would love to have you. The ebook version is only $4, but there's also a physical book that's coming out. But also, so anyway, like anybody else who is watching on replay, I really appreciate your having been here. You can write things down in the comments if things come to you. I do read all of the comments. So if you're on replay and you weren't able to be here live during the chat, please do put stuff down in the comments. And we'll have Drake back. This was fantastic.
I love it. I mean, this is my religion. It's the only thing I talk about 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you like, before we started, you said, how long do I got you? I'm like, long as you want, man. This is what I love.
Well, we will have you back because we go deep. We talk about this all the time. We talk about things like this all the time. So, all right. Thank you all. Everybody's looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody. I'll see you in the morning for the morning grind tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. on the Heath's Geekverse channel. So see you over there for the morning grind. Good night, everybody.